you start to see, moving from just a few hotspots to multiple ones around the country where, they aren't quite at the level of where, for example, New York is in terms of testing. So a lot of progress, and that 5-minute test will both add more capacity and help test in different places, pharmacies, urgent care clinics, keeping people away from the hospital, which is great too. But still, more progress to be made given the extent of the outbreak here.
All right. So since you're talking about testing and that we can have many more tests done, how are we doing just in the spread when it comes to the United States, and also some reports out of Europe that we are seeing a flattening out or a peaking in the number of cases? How far along are we in that? There, I would say, is only very early evidence, speaking about the United States particularly here, in only a few places. Really, really early evidence in Washington, San Francisco, and very, very early in New York, places that took the strongest measures, and nothing that I would come close to calling, a confirmation that we're at any kind of peak. So, still a lot of data that we need to see, and still a lot of abiding by measures, and actually seeing that sort of confirmed, week of declining cases we'd really want to see to actually, firmly believe that we're kind of at a peak. And also, it's a lagging indicator, in terms of strain on the healthcare system. People often end up needing to stay on ventilators for a week or more at a time. So, it's the strain on the hospitals isn't going to peak at the same time as the actual case count, because, it takes a while for people to develop severe symptoms. But some parts of Europe are beginning to look like there might be some improvement, although, again, need to see a sustained trend.
So, Max, just in 30 seconds, what's the status of some of the existing treatments that are out there, maybe for malaria or something else, being repurposed for COVID-19?
Still TBD in terms of actually getting the data we want to prove that these are effective therapeutics. The FDA has moved to make them more widely available, although that's controversial given the state of the data we have so far.
Max, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Max Neeson, Bloomberg Opinion, covering all things healthcare. You can read all of Max's work as well as the other Bloomberg Opinion writers at Bloomberg.com/opinion and OPIN Go on the terminal, Lisa.
Well, I will just say at 7 p.m. every day, everyone opens their windows and cheers for first responders. And we started doing it probably about, 4 or 5 days ago. And every night, like clockwork, at 7 p.m., you can hear everybody cheering. And it's heartwarming, but it's sincere. People are really grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, some of the photos that Tom Keene had posted on his Twitter account from his apartment showing the tents outside in Central Park, Mount Sinai's, outside Mount Sinai's Hospital, are also just extraordinary photos as well. So looking at the markets here, again, kind of very calm here. The S&P is essentially flat here as we grind through the day. This is Bloomberg.
Right now, let's head to our 99 studios in Washington, D.C. Nathan Hager. Nathan.
Lisa, President Trump is now calling for a $2 trillion infrastructure package as the next round of stimulus from the coronavirus outbreak. The president got behind that idea on Twitter moments ago, saying with interest rates at zero, the Phase 4 stimulus should be very big and bold, in all caps. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called for a focus on infrastructure recovery in an MSNBC interview this morning. She also said Congress may move to mail-in voting this November, saying she hopes there's support for the Postal Service as part of the Phase 4 package if that comes to fruition. Overall, there are more than 160,000 coronavirus cases in this country, 3,100 deaths, and the infection count is growing by about 20,000 a day. But Dr. Anthony Fauci with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases tells CNN he is seeing glimmers that social distancing is having an effect.
You're starting to see that the daily increases are not in that steep incline. They're starting to be able to possibly flatten out. I mean, again, you look at it carefully, hope it's going in the right direction, but that's what we really are trying to attain.
Fauci says, though, the situation in this country remains very dangerous. A growing number of states have imposed stay-at-home orders. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is warning of the danger of expansive emergency powers that have been introduced during the pandemic. She says they should not come at the expense of fundamental principles of press freedom, democracy, and human rights. Von der Leyen stopped short of mentioning Hungary. That country's parliament handed its prime minister, Viktor Orban, the right to rule by decree indefinitely yesterday. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
Our relationship with Asia is simple. Find the most experienced journalists.
These countries will need each other more and more in the future.
Let them gather the best data and experts.
Let's get to Singapore now and our guest.
Then bring everything they find straight to you.
Let's talk about where you are. There's quite a lot of headwinds there too.
Actually, it's not simple. It's just better. Bloomberg Daybreak Asia, tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
Okay, kids, Dad's gonna teach you how to dance. First, spread your feet apart. Then, pump your knee, nod your head, shake your hips, and bite your lip ever so slightly. Now, with one hand in the air, point at people with the other hand. I call that the rock star.
Dance like a dad. It's a great way to make a moment with your kids.
Now, make a face like it just smells something bad.
Visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Leave it to the New York Times to make the most intelligent pop music podcast out there.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast.
On the Popcast, the Times music staff gets together for a weekly roundtable on the hottest topics in popular music. From award show autopsies and reactions to new releases to difficult-to-process scandals and emerging themes in the music landscape, hear distinguished music critics share their perspectives on the latest music news, songs, albums, and artists of note on the New York Times Popcast. Search and favorite Popcast to join the conversation.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the Favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
TuneIn makes it easy to be a part of the conversation. Just make sure push notifications are enabled to hear about breaking news and trending topics from around the sports world. You'll also get custom recommendations of podcasts and radio stations covering the sports and teams you care about. Not all heroes wear capes, but most wear tights.
And here we go, now it's underway. Cover, Rowan, wins.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis of the latest WrestleMania, turn on the WWE podcast. Or listen to the Steve Austin Show for no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities.
It's good to be here tonight. It's an empty building.
For these and more, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling.
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with our Washington correspondent about the many political battles being waged in the Capitol over how to deal with the new coronavirus.
You couldn't imagine a president personalizing a crisis with a virus, but somehow that's where we are.
Susan Glasser. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
Living in a shelter, juggling 3 jobs. I had to be resilient. That's something that you can't teach.
We rely so much on a resume, yet it could never tell the full story of someone who
had to be independent and take initiative. And that's how I handle every project I get.
Discover new ways to develop great talent at gradsoflife.org. Brought to you by Grads of Life and the Ad Council.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education
and to finish what I started to get my diploma.
Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
The S&P's been swinging between small losses and small gains after a consumer confidence measure and a regional manufacturing reading fell less than expected. The NASDAQ is leading the indices. Still, the benchmark for American equities is down 18% this year. We check the numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here. On Bloomberg Radio, the S&P 500 is currently up 0.2%, up 6. Dow is up 0.3%, up 67, and the NASDAQ is up 0.9%, up 70. The 10-year is up 13.30 seconds. The yield is 0.68%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is up 2.4% at $20.58 a barrel, with COMEX gold down 1% at $16.2650 an ounce. Dollar yen is at 107.60. The euro at $1.0997, and the British pound at $1.2464. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, some of the economic data coming in is starting to reflect the impacts from the COVID-19. The Conference Board Consumer Confidence Index declined sharply in March following an increase in February. To help us walk through the numbers, we welcome Bart Van Ark. He's a chief economist at the Conference Board. Bart, thanks so much for joining us. What did the March data show?
Well, at the aggregate level of the overall consumer confidence index, of course, the index is showing a drop from 132.6 in February to 120 in March. That perhaps is not as huge a drop as you might expect, but it is important that when we look at the responses to this survey, most of these responses were still coming in the sort of early half of March, and with a majority even in the first week of March. So this was before the COVID crisis was announced to be a global pandemic, and the U.S. wasn't really strongly affected. However, if we look below the aggregate number, particularly on expectations, we saw already a very significant weakening from 108 to 88.2 in March. So that's a big decline. So even in early March, consumers were already getting very concerned about the outlook, and obviously that will only have strengthened over the last few weeks.
Well, this has been an unprecedented period on a lot of different levels, one of which is just the speed of which this has hit and changed the whole global economic backdrop. So it sort of is difficult to cling to some of the previous leading indicators. When you look at some of the indicators in real time, we saw the jobless claims last week. We're expecting more data on that front. We've gotten regional Fed measures coming out showing one dire picture after another. What's the most likely economic scenario that you see going forward?
Oh, I think so. First of all, when we look at the index where it stands now, I think we'll see significantly more declines happening over the next few weeks and months. Even compared to the financial crisis, we're not yet at that low point. At that time, the expectations index dropped at some point of 230, and we're still at 88. So there's still a very long way to go in terms of declining confidence going forward. There are really a couple of scenarios now to your question, Lisa, on sort of where we're going. Really a couple of scenarios to think about now. One is indeed that we will see this very deep contraction happening for at least another month, if not perhaps 6 weeks or 2 months, but then see a fairly strong rebound kind of recovery. Most of the forecasts are still sort of working on that scenario, that we will be able to begin to open up the economy again over the summer. Still leaves the question what will happen after the summer in the case of a resurgence of cases. But I have to say that I think it's actually more likely that the contraction may continue well into the third quarter. It's very likely that containment measures and social distancing measures will continue even if the economy opens up. A lot of that will remain in place. Businesses have to be prepared for a lot of regulatory pressure from authorities about under what conditions they can open up in order to avoid the spread of the virus. So I think this is really a much longer period. Therefore, even the third quarter may still be a fairly weak quarter, and we may not really begin to see a recovery in the economy of any significance until the final quarter of the year.
So, Bart, give us your assessment on kind of the fiscal stimulus we've seen. We had that $2 trillion bill, and now there's talk of another $2 trillion, perhaps, infrastructure bill. How do you expect that to impact the economy?
Well, it will, of course, help to sort of, put a bottom into the decline here. Some of this money will go to small businesses who are sort of in immediate need of financial support. If they don't get that financial support, they will have to close down. And that would make it much more difficult for them to actually open up again once the recovery starts. So I think we'll see some effects there. It will not necessarily accelerate growth now, but it will help these businesses to be able to recover again once we get through this crisis. The other part is the support to unemployment and to income. Low-income households will need the money in order just to be able to pay their basic expenses. Sort of in the medium income level, it's very likely that as long as people can pay their basic expenses and their mortgages and everything else, they will put, extra support into savings because they will be prepared for more difficult times to come. And therefore, some of these effects on the consumption side may be delayed, and we will not begin to see anything of that really picking into the second half of the year.
Bart, when we talk about the consumer, it accounts for about 2/3 of the American economy. And there was a survey out from Bankrate that I was looking at this morning showing that more than half of Americans are reducing their consumptions, even online, in response to the coronavirus crisis, just to shore up enough capital heading into this period. How big of a recession do you think the U.S. is going to have this year?
Whatever way we define a recession, this is going to be a recession, whether it is multiple months of contraction or, a level of GDP by the end of the year, which can be, between 5 and 7% lower than what it was at the beginning of the year. So this is a big recession, and it's bigger than what we've seen in 2008 and 2009. But it's a very kind of unique recession in terms of recent history, because basically what happened here is the economy's been shut down. That's where we are right now. At the moment, this is primarily a supply shock because, people just can't go anywhere. But gradually, that supply shock will turn into a demand problem. And that is that once we can begin to open up the economy, the real question is how quickly can that consumer come back online? When are they ready to start spending again? Are they allowed to be spending, to be able to go out to the shops and the restaurants and everything else? And how willing are they to spend? Because they're taking a big hit at the moment, and they are being told that if they're not careful, we may have a resurgence of cases later in the year. So I think people will be cautious in order to start spending again. And I think, therefore, again, the recovery will be a difficult recovery and a slow one.
Bart Van Ark, thank you so much for being with us. Bart Van Ark, chief economist at the Conference Board, talking about consumer confidence and the sort of U.S. economic forecast for this year and beyond. A little bit, not a little bit, very bleak from an increasing number of people. I will just say, interesting that President Trump, just want to repeat this, is putting out there a proposal for a $2 trillion infrastructure spending program, I guess, in addition to the other rounds of rescue financing. We have more. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks have been fluctuating from gains to losses, and now little changed on this final trading day of the quarter. The S&P 500 down 18% this year as measures to combat the coronavirus close large parts of the economy. Goldman Sachs expects the U.S. economy to experience a far deeper slump than previously anticipated. Analysts say it will shrink 34% in the second quarter. Unemployment will soar to 15% by mid-year. Retailers from Macy's to Urban Outfitters halting pay for much of their workforce while preserving some benefits. The wave of furloughs brings the total number of employees who are out of paycheck at major chains to more than 500,000, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. And the pandemic is sparking enormous changes in e-commerce over a very short period of time, according to Adobe Analytics. Average daily online sales of groceries, for example, doubled by the middle of March compared with the start of the month. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscription.
The moment you realise you've drilled through an electric cable. The moment you realise that doesn't just mean no telly on the wall, but no telly full stop. The moment you realise you've got British Gas Home Care. And not just your electrics, but your plumbing, heating and drains are all covered. So the moment you've got a problem, make it our problem. British Gas, here to solve. Search British Gas Home Care.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
On this week's On the Media, we are awash in messages, but some messengers are more effective than others.
Ventilators, ventilators, ventilators. We need 30,000.
Meanwhile, some media outlets choose not to air the president's press briefings live, and media critics ponder what's the right balance between good information and all information. All that and more on this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast on TuneIn today.
Not all heroes wear capes, but most wear tights.
And here we go. Now it's underway. Cover on Rowan. Win seconds.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis of the latest WrestleMania, turn on the WWE podcast. Or listen to the Steve Austin Show for no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities.
It's good to be here tonight. It's an empty building.
For these and more, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling. TuneIn makes it easy to be a part of the conversation. Just make sure push notifications are enabled to hear about breaking news and trending topics from around the sports world. You'll also get custom recommendations of podcasts and radio stations covering the sports and teams you care about.
Grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon NA. Member FDIC.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Have you ever thought, I wish I'd had that information sooner?
Talk to us about applications.
Let's fix that.
You own a number of brands.
Bloomberg Business Week, weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg Business Week, now live on YouTube.
Coming up, we are awaiting comments from Andrew Cuomo, governor of the state of New York. We will have them for you in just a moment. His daily press conferences are must listen and must watch. Getting a quick data check here, Lisa. The markets are quiet. I'm going to call them quiet here this morning, Lisa. We've got a little bit of green on the screen. Not going to oversell it here. The S&P up about 0.4. Yeah, fluctuating. Very, very good. About 0.4%. The Dow up 100 points. Let's call it 22,425 on the Dow. NASDAQ a little bit better, up 0.9%. That's 73 points. That's 7847 on the NASDAQ. So what's been a very volatile, obviously, last month or so, and in quarter for U.S. indices, clearly getting a little bit of stability today on the last day of the quarter.
I think one thing that we saw earlier in the month was this feeling of an economic crisis spiraling into a financial crisis. And right now, as we end the month and as we end the quarter, it does seem like the Fed's fire hose of different stimulus efforts appears to be calming the financial crisis aspect of that. Now, the question is, how deep is the economic damage going to be? What will the fallout be? And we already have seen hundreds of thousands of people laid off, furloughed, particularly in the retail sector, as some of these companies try to figure out how to survive this period of time. And frankly, even though the U.S. Congress has passed a $2 trillion stimulus, it's not getting checks quickly enough to the businesses to keep them from laying off that amount of people.
Yeah, so those jobless claims we got last week, 3.28 million, were just shocking. But we will certainly probably, I think the expectation is from economists, see a lot more of that. We had the confidence board data today showing a deterioration in consumer confidence, and that was not even a full, didn't get the full effects of the COVID. So we will get jobless numbers again later this week. And then it's just a question of the GDP. I mean, I think, the question is, we're seeing really radical declines forecasted for the second quarter, 20-30%, maybe even more. But then the question is, will there be or when will the rebound occur? Will it be a V, a U, an L, something along those lines? Nobody knows right now. Well,
definitely front center is the retail sector, and someone who's been tracking this for us is Seema Shah, director of the consumer and retail trends at Credit Intel, and she joins us now. Seema, so great to speak with you. I want to just start with the incredible amount of furloughs and layoffs that we've seen from major retail chains, more than 500,000. Is there a sense that these are temporary and that these employees will get rehired, or are you expecting a dramatic shift in the entire retail landscape?
I think in the near term, there was probably, initially when people started closing their stores, I think there was a thought that, hey, we're going to be able to open them in a couple of weeks and we'll carry on business as usual. But now what you've seen within the last 48 hours, the number of retailers that are closing their stores for an undetermined amount of time and furloughing their workers, to me, it feels a little bit more permanent, because though many of these retailers might be able to withstand not having any sales or, customers really coming in for a couple of weeks, maybe, some can go longer. To me, this seems like when we come out of it, it's going to be a smaller retail environment, meaning maybe they'll figure out how to do more with less just to manage the cost structure as they come out of it.
So, Seema, give us a sense of just kind of, the staying power that some of these retailers have to keep their doors
Hey, wait, Paul,
closed.
actually, hold that thought. Seema Shah, well, hopefully we'll get back to you. Right now, Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York is giving an update on the latest and what has become the epicenter of the coronavirus crisis in the United States. Let's take a listen to what he has to say.
People than any state in the country, and I'm very proud of that. More per capita than China and South Korea. Total number of people tested, 200,000. Population of 19 million. It's not going to give you a random sample, but it's been helping us track down the positive cases. Number of positive cases, 9,298. Total cases, 75,000 cases. You see the predominance in New York City, then Westchester, then Nassau, then Suffolk, then Rockland. So you can see it's that area of density, and it spreads out from that area of density. The march of coronavirus across the state of New York continues. We're down to just 2 counties that don't have a case. The overall numbers, 75,000 have tested positive, 10,000 people in our hospitals, 2,700 ICU patients. Good news, 4,900, almost 5,000 people discharged. That's up 771. So people come in, they get treated, they go home. Excuse me. New York is at 75,000 cases. Next state is 16,000. California is at 7,000. So you can see New York is a magnitude of difference more than any other state. 1,550 deaths. That's up from 1,218 yesterday. Again, we're studying the charts. We're trying to study the data, follow the data. The data is uneven. It bounces. Numbers often bounce in any model. There are variables in this model. The hospitals are reporting it. So what every hospital reported that day, were they busy? Are they combining a couple of days in one? It's an imperfect reporting mechanism. But you see the basic line is still up. What the statisticians will tell you is you basically draw the straight line that the columns indicate. And you see that we're still going up, which is what we see on the overall trajectory, that we're still going up. Number of intubations was down, not much, but it was down, and that's a good sign. You also see the number of discharges going up, and that's consistent. The longer people are in, they either get treated and leave, or they get put on a ventilator, and the longer you're on a ventilator, the less likelihood you will come off the ventilator. That is the blunt truth of this situation. We have 2 missions overall that we are pursuing. One is the front line of this battle is our hospital system. That's what this is going to come down to. The second is social responsibility. Stay at home. Don't get infected in the first place. Don't get infected in the first place because it goes back to you're creating a burden on our healthcare system that our healthcare system cannot handle. We're talking about exceeding the capacity of our hospital system by some estimates 2 times. So what does this come down to, besides all the other issues? It comes down to not overwhelming the hospital system because those people who need acute care may not be able to get the acute care. So it's all about the hospital system. That is the front line. What we're doing is we are following the mathematical projections of the experts. We're speaking to all the healthcare professionals, all the healthcare providers, World Health Organization, National Institute of Health, Dr. Fauci, CDC, FDA, the whole alphabet soup of healthcare experts. and the mathematicians who then have different models. And we talk to about 5 different models, and we compare the models, and we try to find the median through the models. That's how we plan everything. Follow the data, follow the science. People ask me, what do you think? What do you think? I don't think about this. What do I know? I'm not an expert. I'm not opining. I talk to experts, and I follow people who know. But for the hospitals, procure equipment, identify the beds, support the staff. That's what it's been all about. Of those priorities, number 1 is support the staff. They are the front line, and they need relief. They are physically exhausted. Even more, they are emotionally exhausted. This is unlike other disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods. They happen, they're fast, they're over, you start rebuilding. This is different. This is ongoing, and the duration itself is debilitating and exhausting and depressing. I'm speaking to healthcare professionals who say, look, more than physically tired, I'm just emotionally tired. Seeing the pain, seeing the death that they're dealing with every day. In general, I am tired of being behind this virus. We've been behind this virus from day one. The virus was in China. We knew it was in China. Unless we assume there's some immune system variation with Asian people, it was coming here. And we have been behind it from day one since it got here. And we've been playing catch up. You don't win playing catch up. We have to get ahead of it. The second rule is never underestimate your opponent. And we underestimated this virus. It's more powerful, it's more dangerous than we expected. And the third point is plan forward. Get ahead of it. Get ahead of it. Fight the fight today, yes, but anticipate the next battle and plan for the next battle. And the main battle is at the apex. We're still going up the mountain. The main battle is on the top of the mountain. That's where the main battle is going to be, the apex of the curve. And then we come down the other side of the mountain. We are planning now for the battle at the top of the mountain. That's what we are doing. Get a staffing plan ready now for the battle at the top of the mountain. Equipment stockpile now. We're gathering equipment that we don't need today because today is not the day of the battle. The battle is when we hit the apex, depending on who you believe, 14 days to 30 days from today. And also we need a social acceptance of the time expectation. We're all anxious, we're all tired, we're all fatigued. It's been all bad news for a long time. Our whole lifestyle has been disrupted. Everybody wants to know one thing: when is it over? Nobody knows. Well, President said by Easter. This one said by this. Nobody knows. You can have a hypothesis, you can have a projection, you can have an opinion, but nobody knows. But I can say this: it is not going to be soon. If our apex is 14 to 21 days, that's our apex. You then have to come down the other side of the mountain once you hit the apex. So calibrate yourself and your expectations so you're not disappointed every morning you get up. Yesterday we met with the entire state hospital system, Dr. Zucker and our team. First time they were all in one place. And we said to the hospital system, look, what I just said to you, we're dealing with a war. We're dealing with a war we've never dealt with before. We need a totally different mindset and organizational transformation. We can't do business the way we have always done business. We need an unprecedented sense of cooperation, of flexibility, communication, and speed. And that's what we talked through yesterday, and we have to do it now. The healthcare system is one of those balkanized systems. It's like our state education system. It's like our criminal justice system. It's in place. It's fragmented. They have their own identities, their own associations. It's regionally organized. That all has to change. We don't have the ability to meet the capacity of our healthcare system as an entirety. That assumes the healthcare system is working as an entirety. That's not how the healthcare system is organized now. We have New York City hospitals, and then we have Long Island hospitals, and then we have Westchester hospitals, and then we have upstate hospitals. That has to go. Even in New York City, you have two basic hospital systems in New York City. You have the private hospitals, voluntary hospitals, about 160 of them, which are some of the finest healthcare institutions in the United States of America. This is Mount Sinai, Columbia Presbyterian, etc. Some of their members are also upstate, but they're the large private institutions. Greater New York Hospital Association. Ken Rasky runs that association of 160. You then have, in New York City, the public hospitals. The New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation. They are 11 public hospitals. They are a universe, and then you have the private hospitals as a separate universe. The 11 public hospitals are the hospitals that in many ways have always been under greater stress and greater need. We have to get those two systems, the private system and the public system in New York City, working together in a way they never did before. The distinction of private-public, that has to go out the window. We are one healthcare system. On top of that, it can't be the downstate hospitals and the upstate hospitals and the Long Island hospitals. When we talk about capacity of beds, when I say we now have 75,000 beds, that's a statewide number. That means those beds have to be available to the people in New York City or Nassau, even if those beds are up in Albany. So combining that whole system, and you're no longer just the Western New York hospitals or the Central New York hospitals. It's one coordinated system. It's much easier said than done, but we have to do it. On top of that, you have to overlay the new federal beds that came in, that are an entirely new component. We have Javits Center, 2,500 beds. We have the USNS Comfort, 1,000 beds. We're planning other federal facilities. These all have to be coordinated on top of the existing hospital network. So you see the organizational situation that we're dealing with. And let's be honest, and let's learn from the past. We know where we have to focus. We know where we're going to have problems in the next hospitals, because the hospitals that have the least capacity, that have already been stressed, are the hospitals that are not going to be able to handle the additional load. That is a fact. You know which hospitals were struggling. We do reports all the time about the financial capacity of hospitals and what hospitals are in stronger versus weaker position. The hospitals that are in a weaker position are the hospitals that are going to suffer when they then carry an added burden. That was Elmhurst Hospital. It happened to be a public hospital. It happened to be a public hospital in a place of density. It happened to get overwhelmed. And that's what, then you saw the burden on the staff. You saw the emotion. You saw the stress. That can't happen. And that's what we talked about yesterday. And people said, well, Elmhurst isn't my responsibility. Elmhurst is a public hospital. The city runs it. I don't run it. It's New York City. It's not a private hospital. I don't care which link breaks in the chain. The chain is still broken. It doesn't matter which hospital, which link. Any link breaks, the chain breaks. The healthcare system is a chain. It breaks anywhere, it breaks everywhere. That has to be our mentality. We laid out a full plan on how to do facility development, how to move people among hospitals so nobody gets overloaded, shifting patients, shifting staff, shifting supplies. None of us have enough supplies. Okay, then let's pool our supplies and let's put them out to the people who need them. And just because one hospital happened to have found a vendor from China who delivered 5 million masks, let's share those masks. And we talked about that yesterday. We also talked again at length about ventilators, which is, everybody knows, is a key piece of equipment, identifying all the ventilators in the state, who has them in a stockpile, who ordered them, who expects them to come in, and we'll have one stockpile of ventilators that we can distribute for everyone who needs them. We also talked about splitting of ventilators, because that's a technology that does exist. It's been used before. It's not ideal. You take one ventilator and it's used for 2 patients. The federal government is a partner in this, obviously. I spoke to the president again yesterday about this situation. I spoke to the vice president. I spoke to Jared Kushner. The White House has been very helpful. We have to get the federal agencies on the ground to understand how this operates, especially FEMA, because we have to be coordinated and people have to know what they're doing. And this is no time for anyone to be learning on the job. And we're going to be working through that today. PPE, same thing. We want to know what everybody has. One stockpile, we'll distribute it fairly. Testing. How do we get out? When does this end? This ends when we get a fast-track test, an at-home test, a 15-minute test, and people can then find out when they can go back to work because they're negative. We're working on additional testing. As I said, the Department of Health has a new test, but that's when this ends. We're also working on the new medications. We're leading the country in many of those developments. We have saliva testing now. We're working on the antibody testing, and we're working on the plasma testing at the same time. We put together a central coordinating team. It's going to be led by the Department of Health. Westchester's on it, Greater New York is on it, Haines is on it, New York City is on it, Long Island is on it. If the federal government is going to participate, they have to be part of this team because we have to know what we're doing, and I don't want FEMA coming in and blowing the coordination of what everyone is trying to do. The coordinating team is going to organize upstate, downstate transfers, set patient loads for hospitals, right? So if one hospital gets up near a overload capacity, let's call it, those hospitals start to send patients to other hospitals before they get up to their max within the New York City public hospital system, within the Greater New York private system, and then among the different systems. It's a whole different mentality, but we have to do it. We said 2 missions. One was hospitals. Second was individual responsibility. Individual responsibility is about discipline. It's about selflessness, and it's about being informed. The basic point is stay at home. The point is stay at home. I know it's hard to stay at home. And I know everyone thinks, I can go out and I can be smart and I won't get infected because it's me. I'm a superhero. It's not going to be me. That is not true. And it's not just about you. It's not just about your health and your life that you're playing with here, my friend. You can infect other people. So I've been trying to communicate this many different ways for many days. We still see people coming out who don't need to be out. Even for essential workers, people have to be careful. And again, I've been trying to communicate that everyone is subject to this virus. It is the great equalizer. I don't care how smart, how rich, how powerful you think you are. I don't care how young, how old. This virus is the great equalizer. My brother Chris is positive for coronavirus. Found out this morning. He is going to be fine. He's young, in good shape, strong, not as strong as he thinks, but he will be fine. But there's a lesson in this. He's an essential worker, member of the press, so he's been out there. If you go out there, the chance that you get infected is very high. I spoke to him this morning, and he's going to be quarantined in his basement at home. He's just worried about his daughter and his kids.
Governor Andrew Cuomo of the state of New York giving his daily press conference of the latest details coming out from the state of New York and some of those statistics that we've become used to, Lisa, about the beds and the number of confirmed cases, new cases. Still some grim statistics out there. Then just noting that his brother Chris tested positive for the COVID virus this morning.
Yeah, and saying that people keep wondering when is this going to be over, saying it's going to be a while, given the fact that the apex will probably be in the next 2 weeks, and then we have to come down from there, saying the best thing for everyone to do, if they can, is just stay home. It is the great equalizer, everyone vulnerable to this virus. From New York, this is Bloomberg Markets.
In addition to Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the latest news and biggest newsmakers on Bloomberg Television. Look for us on DirecTV Channel 353 or check your local listings.
Imagine winning 10 grand. Yes! With Set for Life, you could win 10 grand every month for 30 years. Get in! Amazing! Woo! Yes! Sweet! Unbelievable!
Play Thursday, and you could make every month amazing with Set for Life from the National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen. Prize may be capped. Rules, procedures, and game-specific rules apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Not all heroes wear capes, but most wear tights.
And here we go. Now it's underway. Cover. Rowan. Wait a second.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis of the latest WrestleMania, turn on the WWE podcast. Or listen to the Steve Austin Show for no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities.
It's good to be here tonight. It's an empty building. But I'm
For these and more, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling.
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with our Washington correspondent about the many political battles being waged in the Capitol over how to deal with the new coronavirus.
You couldn't imagine a president personalizing a crisis with a virus, but somehow that's where we are.
Susan Glasser. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
Financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, this is Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. Welcome. It's only been 4 days now since Congress enacted a bill including $2 trillion in new stimulus for the American economy to try to get us past this crisis. And already they're talking about something more. In fact, President Trump just today said he favors another $2 trillion for infrastructure. To get a sense of what is being discussed in terms of yet another, a fourth package now, we turn to Anna Edgerton. She's Bloomberg's congressional correspondent. correspondent. So, Anna, thank you so much for joining us. What are we talking about?
Well, this was a really interesting tweet from the president because he sounded exactly like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. They've both said that they want infrastructure projects much more so than Republicans in Congress. And the fact that the president mentioned low interest rates right now as a reason to pursue this kind of project is exactly what Nancy Pelosi said last week. So it looks like they're on the same page, but we haven't heard the same from Republicans. So we'll be asking Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell where exactly congressional Republicans stand on this as well.
And they may be on the same page, maybe President Trump and Nancy Pelosi when it comes to infrastructure, but there are other issues that are left over from that last bill that seems to be quite contentious. I mean, if they really do go forward with a fourth package, is it going to be as easy to get done as the last one?
That's a really good question, and it's going to kind of depend on the urgency. One reason why they were able to get this $2 trillion package through last week was because it was such an urgent problem. You could see the effects that the virus response was having on the economy in a very immediate way. So we'll see at the end of April when lawmakers get back to Washington whether or not there's the same sense of urgency. And a lot of that will depend on where the economy is. Last week we saw 3.28 million Americans filing jobless claims. We'll see what the numbers are this week and whether or not that encourages lawmakers to do more quickly.
Yeah, we have those jobs numbers coming out on Friday. Thank you so much to Anna Edgerton, our Bloomberg congressional correspondent. And now let's get a check on the markets for Taylor Riggs. The last day of the month, last day of the entire quarter, Taylor. Yeah. It's been a rough quarter. How are we ending up?
Yeah, it has been a rough quarter, David. So let's take a look at sort of how things are shaping up cross-asset. I want to start with the S&P. We're now up for 4 out of the last 6 days or so within the S&P 500, 5 in the last 6. So we're doing pretty well. We aren't seeing the types of gains that we've been seeing above 2 or 3% or so, but I think this sense of calm certainly is reassuring. You are still getting some buying of Treasury bonds. If the Fed's buying Treasuries, markets are buying Treasuries. So you're getting catching a bit here for full faith and credit, down about 5 basis points or so in yield. You are seeing high yield come off just a little bit. This is after it had been stronger for the last 5 days or so, but there are still signs that credit markets are thawing here. You had the first junk bond in about a month come to market. So you are seeing some signs of that market stabilization despite that high yield ETF being off about 0.2%. And you're seeing a little bit of weakening here in the yen. I do want to flip a board and see what this means cross asset for the quarter, because like you said, it has been a rough quarter still, despite some of the gains that we've seen in the last week on the major averages. S&P 500 still off almost 20% now year to date. Crude clearly bearing the brunt of that. Energy is the worst performer within the S&P 500, and so crude there off 66%. The 10-year yield, David, this is incredible. In 3 months, we've come down 124 basis points. So we're down now clearly well below 1%. You're still up almost about 18 basis points or so from the record lows that we had seen. And dollar strength is the name of the quarter. You'd seen massive funding issues given the strengthening of the dollar. Everyone wanted dollars in cash. And so for the quarter, Bloomberg Dollar Index, despite some weakening of late, still up more than 5%, David.
Okay, thank you so much to Taylor Riggs for the report on the markets. And now let's get a really review of the quarter. Cameron Christ from Markets Live, Bloomberg Markets Live, has a piece out today. Cameron, welcome. It's a little bit encouraging, actually. If you're in risk parity, it doesn't look as bad as maybe you thought it did.
Well, I mean, not as bad as it looked a couple of weeks ago. It isn't the same as looking good, obviously. And, there's the other issue of how many people have had the temerity to sort of hold their positions throughout what's obviously been a tumultuous quarter, and particularly a tumultuous March. But if we certainly, I tend to look at these things on a monthly basis rather than a quarterly basis. But if we look at the performance of sort of a classic balanced portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% Treasury bonds, yeah, it's been pretty lousy. This quarter, it's down like 5.2, 5.3%, but that's nowhere near as bad as it was a week or two ago. And really, it's not particularly notable if we go back in history. During the Great Depression, obviously, and even during the financial crisis, this sort of portfolio fared considerably worse than it has done this month as we come to a close.
Yeah, that's if your fixed income is in treasuries. What if you're in a broader set of bonds, both investment grade and otherwise?
Yeah, well, clearly you've done less well this month, but by the same token, you would have done less, or even more poorly during the GFC or during the Depression as well. As of yesterday, and this number is a rough approximation, the Bloomberg Barclays Aggregate Index, which is a mixture of all investment grade bonds, both government and corporate, I think was down about 1% on the month versus a rise of 3% for treasuries only.
So finally, looking forward into the next month, I remember talking to you last week, and you said some of what we're seeing in equities is actually rebalancing of portfolios. How much of that's going on even today? Is Wednesday likely to look very different from Tuesday?
Yeah, it's hard to say how much is going on right now. I mean, if we see a final flurry, it'll probably be near the close. But I do think that starting tomorrow, we'll get a cleaner read on things, because we can be relatively sure that there's going to be less of this sort of flow than there has been over the last week or so. Plus, we get more forward-looking economic data. The ISM survey is, I believe, slated for release tomorrow. So that will give us kind of our first sort of A-list data that sort of accounts for some of the lockdown and economic shutdown.
Cameron, finally, the U.S. government, both in fiscal and in monetary, has really stepped up big time. How much of a difference has that made to investors at this point?
Yeah, I think that, that's the important caveat to all this stuff, is that this recovery that we've had from the lows of a week ago last Friday is partially a function of the incredible response we've had, both on the monetary side and the fiscal side. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves is, has the response been sufficient to sort of eliminate future risk? And I think the answer there is almost certainly no. Even as extraordinary as it's been, we don't have enough information to judge one way or the other. But insofar as we haven't yet seen the flow of credit to small businesses, clearly they are under pressure, and that's going to radiate throughout the economy. So I think it's a case of sort of they've saved the patient who's been hit by a bus in the emergency room, but there's still a long road to recuperation.
Yeah, and of course, the virus always gets a vote these days. Thank you so much to Cameron Christ of the Bloomberg MLive team. Great to have you with us, Cameron. And now it's time for Bloomberg First Word News. For that, we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. CNN anchor Chris Cuomo has been diagnosed with COVID-19. In a memo to employees today, the network said Cuomo is feeling well and will continue to work from home. Cuomo was most recently at CNN's offices in the Hudson Yards neighborhood of New York City last Friday. He is the brother of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. The mortgage markets and the travel industry may get aid in a fourth round of economic stimulus. Bloomberg has learned the White House has compiled lists from government agencies totaling roughly $600 billion. Meantime, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says states and local governments will need more help. Spain has had its deadliest day yet in the coronavirus outbreak. The Spanish reported 849 fatalities in the last 24 hours. That brings the death toll there to almost 8,200. Spain has more than 94,000 confirmed cases. China says it has put more than 1,500 people infected with the coronavirus, but who don't have symptoms, under observation. The move comes a day after China's premier urged local officials to prioritize efforts to track and expand the screening of symptom-free carriers. There has been growing criticism of China's failure to disclose accurate numbers. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. Coming up next, we turn to Bloomberg political contributor Rick Davis about what this coronavirus crisis is doing to these presidential campaigns. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
market upheavals.
The narrative is driven.
Hi, I'm Danica Patrick.
We need to tackle coronavirus together. You can help by not travelling unless it is absolutely essential. With limited staff, TfL is supporting journeys for critical workers only, especially the NHS and emergency services. No one else should be travelling. If you must travel, try to avoid the busy times, particularly the early morning. We have already seen fewer people using our services. Thank you for doing your bit. Stay at home. Do not travel. Save lives.
I love dogs and cats. Short-haired, long-haired. I love you all, don't I, Bianca? But I don't love cat hair all over my carpet, which is why I got a job testing vacuum cleaners in the Witch Test Lab. We rub an exact amount of real pet hair into an exact area of real carpet to see which vacuum cleaners really suck it up. And the vacuums that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your home. Witch.co.uk. Our tests find you the best.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks edge a bit higher after economic data tops estimates as investors debate whether the market meltdown has ended given the continued spread of the new coronavirus. Treasuries are up. The S&P is headed for its first gain in 6 sessions, led by tech, after a consumer confidence measure and a regional manufacturing reading fell less than had been expected. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500 is up 0.2%, up 6. The Dow's up 0.25%, up 57, and the Nasdaq's up 0.6%, up 49. The 10-year is up 17.30 seconds with a yield of 0.67%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is currently up over 2% at $20.50 a barrel. COMEX gold's down 1.4% at $16.1970 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.73. The euro $1.999, and the British pound $1.24.27. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now more Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Well, even in the middle of a coronavirus crisis, there is a presidential race going on. We thought we'd check in and see exactly what it is to run a campaign in the middle of a crisis. For that, we bring in Bloomberg political contributor, now Stone Court Capital, Rick Davis. So, Rick, thanks so much for joining us over the telephone here. As I say, you actually have run a presidential campaign. That was John McCain's in 2008 in the middle of the great financial crisis. What do you do when you're running a campaign and something this big happens?
Yeah, thank you, David, and I'm glad to see that everybody there is doing well. Look, I mean, you lose control of the narrative. You lose control of some of your ability to function as a campaign. I mean, there are really 3 components of a campaign: money, organization, and message. And you prior to this kind of crisis, would have said you were in control of most of those things and knew what the outcomes were going to be. And then when you get thrown into a crisis like this, as we were in 2008 during the GFC, that you realize you don't control the outcome. So, for instance, Biden today having a lot of trouble raising money because in this environment, both logistically and motivationally, it's hard to raise money. He's better off on organization than he was a month ago because the nomination is frozen with him in the lead and likely to become the presumptive nominee over time, and so doesn't have to spend that much time focused on the primary activity. But on message, he has a daily presidential briefing that he has to contend with, and he hasn't found his footing right now on how to communicate to the American public in a routine manner where he can extend his message in contrast to what the president's doing every day. So I would say it's an enormous challenge and one that will continue to change through the course of the spring and summer.
You say he's the presumptive nominee, which seems to be the consensus across the entire country. At the same time, how does he get nominated? Because we have primary after primary being postponed. I'm not sure when they're going to happen or how they're going to happen. And then we have, for example, Larry Sabato today writing about the possibility of virtual conventions. We may not even have the Democratic convention, particularly because it's earlier than the Republican.
Yeah, the Democratic convention scheduled for late July actually could pose a problem for the Democratic National Committee. Getting a nomination at this stage isn't really going to be a very difficult task. Rules are pretty loose at a state level, governed by the Democratic National Committee on what they've got to do to select delegates to the convention. Obviously, they are not going to be able to commit to the timetable that they had, but even the methodology could change. You could have state central committees and things like that making decisions in lieu of a convention or a primary or a caucus. So they'll come to grips with sort of how organizationally within the bylaws of the party that they can actually get these delegates elected. And Biden's polling advantage is still substantially ahead, almost more than 2-1 over Bernie Sanders. So there really doesn't seem to be any movement since the coronavirus outbreak really stopped the political activity. So Biden should be okay as time progresses. And I would say that the conventions are a nice to have, but not a must to have. It's pretty clear this is going to be a very short campaign season where you would have the Democratic opponent running against the Republican Donald Trump. And regardless of the outcome of the conventions, the fall campaigns, September and October, are really going to be definitional. They usually are anyway, but it just means not much outside of coronavirus is going to be discussed before that. And I would think that that's very plausible.
The one thing you do have to have, though, is an election, a general election in November. You had Nancy Pelosi coming out and saying basically she thinks we should be looking at a vote-in campaign, that we should vote by mail, we have to appropriate money for the Postal Service. Traditionally, Republicans have not been very enthusiastic about opening up the gates to voters.
Yeah, Republicans have never liked legislation that allowed either online registration, motor voter kind of legislation, or vote by mail. Many states now do it. Washington State is a 100% vote by mail state. Others have substantial amounts of their general election ballots cast by mail. But it's a patchwork quilt of rules and regulations. And in this last CARES Act that was just passed with $1 trillion worth of benefits, only $400 million was put in there to evaluate vote-by-mail options. Maybe 10 times that would have to be appropriated in order to actually facilitate a national vote-by-mail program. And that's if you could still get Republicans in the Senate and House to cooperate, with that effort. Obviously, everyone is hopeful that you don't have to go there, but you better have a plan, because the one thing we've learned is nobody knows how long or what dimensions this coronavirus will keep us occupied.
At the same time, at this point, and things can change, does it appear that this election will be determined basically on how President Donald Trump is perceived to have led us through this crisis?
That's right. I think that anybody talking about any other issue other than COVID-19 between now and certainly the fall campaign, but probably all the way through the election, is going to be wasting their time. I mean, this always has been shaping up to be a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency, and now his presidency is going to be defined by COVID.
Yeah, thank you so much to Rick Davis, our very special Bloomberg political contributor. I'm glad to see you're doing well as well, Rick. Coming up next, we're going to have Senator Bill Cassidy of the state of Louisiana. He's both a senator and a doctor. We're going to talk to him about what's going on in his home state. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Why do...
The moves may be choreographed, but the drama is real.
I dare you! I beg you to come down here right now!
Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown, check out the What's Wrong with Wrestling show. And for a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, listen to Talk is Jericho. For these and more podcasts, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
On this week's On the Media, we are awash in messages, but some messengers are more effective than others.
Ventilators, ventilators, ventilators. We need 30,000.
Meanwhile, some media outlets choose not to air the president's press briefings live, and media critics ponder what's the right balance between good information and all information. All that and more on this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast on TuneIn today.
Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown to a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Senator Bill Cassidy of the state of Louisiana is a Republican who is also a doctor in addition to being a lawmaker, and he joins us now. So, Senator Cassidy, thank you so much for being with us. As I say, you're a doctor, your wife's a doctor as well. Louisiana, I'm sorry to say, is becoming a hotspot. Give us a sense of the state of the virus in your state.
Yeah, it's spreading. It started in New Orleans, the New Orleans area. About 2 to 3 weeks ago, we had one case. Now we have over 4,000 with about 200 people dead. And so, and obviously it's mainly affecting the older folks, but it can also affect the younger folks. But Dave, when I talk to people, they want to know how we get out of this. How do we return to work? So one thing I published in the Wall Street Journal last Friday, an editorial, based upon my kind of experience as a doctor doing immunization work. Once somebody has been exposed and cleared the virus, and about 85% of the people who are exposed don't have symptoms or have minimal symptoms, they are now immune. Some people think the immunity, or at least that's the best thinking, and some people think the immunity will last for up to 3 years, which means they can return to work without fearing infection or fearing infecting others. The nurse can take care of the routine patient without wearing personal protective equipment. The bartender can serve drinks, not fearing infection, not fearing being infected. And so this is a way forward. Congress has given CDC money to implement this program, but this is how we emerge from the medical crisis, which is causing the economic crisis.
I've heard some about that suggestion specifically, but do we need an effective antibody test in order to make sure whether somebody has the immunity? And do we have that test today, sir?
Two things. If somebody has been shown to be infected, okay, I had the virus, and now I'm a month out, you're 99% you're immune. In fact, 14 days later, 99% you're immune. So we do know that having once been established you were infected, then clearing virus means that most likely you're immune. A few exceptions, but that's for the doctors to talk about, not for a general program. The second thing is about the antibody test. Yes, that whole 85% of folks who didn't get tested because they either had no symptoms or they were minimal, there would be an antibody test to establish indeed you've been exposed. Now, a couple of the companies are now releasing these tests. We ask when they're going to be generally available, and there's still some limitation of supply, but you can make these generally available. Now, the fact that this can be done has been shown in concept. The Germans just tested everybody, and they established who is positive for immunity, who is infected, who is yet to be infected. But now, again, they're given immunity certificates, which allow people to return to work. So if you go to work, you don't have to maintain 6 feet between your coworker. You can kind of, shoulder to shoulder go at it, and that's going to improve efficiencies.
Are you concerned at all, Senator Cassidy, about the possibility of sending a message to the American people that you don't need to stay at home because of the hope of coming back? How do we make sure that we only let the people back that really do have the immunity?
So the Germans are doing with an immunity certificate, but I'm basing it, when I was a practicing physician, I did lots of public health. And I based our approach upon that which we use for immunizations. When our children are immunized as babies, they're given measles, mumps, rubella, hepatitis B, etc. That is put into an online registry. paid for by taxpayers, maintained by states. So they move to another state, they join the military, or they go to nursing school, medical school, you name it, and they've got to show proof of immunization. They can log online, pull down that that record of their immunization, show it, it's proof, boom, you're safe. So you can, and it's all compliant with HIPAA. With personal privacy protections for medical records. And so we can set up an immunity registry where the records are kept of the fact that I've tested positive for immunity in a way that can be foreordained. That will be established in the immunity registry. Now, when you go for employment, just like you go for enrollment in college, you're asked for proof of immunity or proof of immunization, in this case, proof of immunity, and you can see that. There's a clear message, constantly reinforced. If you're not immune, you need to stay at home. But if you're immune, you can now be the nurse taking care of the sick people without fearing to be infected. So there'd be a reinforcement, if you will, of the need to be immune by this process.
It's a fascinating possibility, and maybe it could get the economy going faster than we otherwise might expect. So thank you very much to Senator Bill Cassidy of the state of Louisiana for joining us today. And coming up here on Balance of Power, the airlines have been particularly hard hit by this virus, this pandemic around the world. We're going to get to hear from the head of IATA. That's the association that represents the airlines. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. The Conference Board reports its consumer confidence index dropped this month to the lowest in 3 years. The coronavirus outbreak has dampened the outlook for job seekers and businesses over the next 6 months. Meanwhile, the outlook for the economy is looking grim. Goldman Sachs now predicts the economy will shrink by a third in the second quarter, and its economists expect unemployment to climb to 15%. And today is Equal Pay Day for women. Equal Pay Day highlights the overall pay disparity between men and women. According to the latest census data, women earn 81.6 cents for every dollar a man earns. And U.S. stocks are posting small gains on Wall Street. The Dow is up 95 points, S&P up 6, the NASDAQ up 42. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Messaging data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived in Philadelphia. Local time is 3:05 p.m. and the temperature is 67 degrees. At this time, you are now free to use your cellular devices.
You know that feeling when you get to turn your phone on after the plane lands? You can have that feeling every time you drive. Make sure your cell phone is stowed away whenever you are behind the wheel.
Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org. A message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, and the Ad Council.
Have you ever thought, I wish I'd had that information sooner?
What does this tell us about the state of deal making?
Let's fix that.
One unprofitable company plus another doesn't make a profitable company.
Carol Mazur.
Talk to us about real-world applications.
Jason Kelly.
Remind us what the potential is for everyday folk.
Bloomberg Business Week.
Vice President of Exploratory Science is one of the cooler titles.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg Business Week, now live on YouTube.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. We're coming now to our television and radio audiences worldwide. The travel industry, and particularly aviation, has been really hard hit by the coronavirus. And we have our anchor of Bloomberg Close. He's Guy Johnson in London with the head of the Aviation Association, that is IATA. Guy?
Thanks very much indeed, David. Yeah, we're joined by IATA now, the International Air Transport Association's Director General, Alexander Dejuniak. He used to run Air France KLM here in Europe. IATA putting out updated numbers today saying that airlines may lose $39 billion globally in the second quarter. Mr. Dejuniak, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak with us today. Look, I'm wondering how long we've got before we start to see major failures amongst some of the biggest airlines that we know around the world. How long have we got before we start to see that happening unless government steps in?
That's a difficult question because, as you know, we have published figures about, the loss of revenues, $252 billion loss of revenues. The cash burn for the industry, which will account for $61 billion for only the second quarter. And the fact that we estimate that the airlines will run out of cash in 2 or 3 months. So it means that in 2 to 3 months, if nothing is done, we could see bankruptcies for half of our airlines. The point is that the governments have reacted very strongly. They have put together very significant financial stimulus packages. And so if the money is on the table, and we urge government to put the money on the table and to inject it in the balance sheet of the airline, we could overcome, this very, very difficult period. Otherwise, it will be difficult for many of us.
You're saying that the money needs to be put on the table. Are you suggesting that governments are putting out fine words at the moment, but the actions aren't backing them up? Do we need to see that money coming through a little bit more quickly?
No. We first of all, we are very grateful of government. They have done a very good job in putting together these very significant packages. But now that the announcements are made, that the efforts have been done, we say we need urgently money. When we publish a figure about the $60 billion of cash burn in the second quarter, it means that we desperately need cash and urgently. And so we say to government, please now implement the promising, fantastic, policies you have announced.
Just in terms of how this is going to work its way through the system, we clearly have an urgent need for cash right now for the aviation sector in the United States, here in Europe and globally. But there is a danger and a worst case scenario that what we see happening is that we see the current actions being taken by government to contain the virus working. We then see a return to normal life, but we then see a return of the virus later on, potentially in this year. Now, at that point, the airlines will have had their aid. They'd have gone back to kind of normal working conditions, and then we get hit again. What is the kind of the long-term plan here? If we do see a return of this virus, if we do see problems sort of reasserting themselves later on this year, how much patience do you think governments are going to have? Is this aid a one-shot for the carriers to put themselves back into a stable position? And if they don't, is there a danger that we see it returning later this year?
I think that it's not a matter of patience. It's a matter of being able to overcome a crisis in one wave. We hope it will last only for a few months, and that's all. And if there is a second wave, nobody can be held responsible for that. And we hope that governments, will come back with additional packages or cash injection, because nobody. we cannot, say that anyone is responsible for that. We have to fight against this coronavirus. We have to overcome, the different ways, if there are several. One, hopefully, and if there is a second, again, we will ask for help. And we think that governments will understand that it's not the fault of anybody. We have to.
Right. So this is not a one-time. This is not a one-time request you're making for government. This could be potentially further aid being required further down the road. This isn't just the here and now. There could be further aid required.
Of course, we understand that the real point there is to see whether or not the resources of governments are unlimited. We know that they are not unlimited, but we hope that they will have enough financial means, enough money to help the whole economy, because we are not alone there to be in a difficult situation, and the airline industry in particular. So that's what we expect. And if you have figures, you will see that we expect. Yeah, please. Sorry.
Time is short.
Okay.
Do you expect that corporate demand and leisure demand will return in the same way to the same sorts of levels? People talk about a V-shaped recovery. What do you think is going to happen in the airline sector? How quickly do you think demand is going to come back? And do you think this will be seen by corporations as an opportunity maybe to trim budgets? We're all sitting here at home at the moment. We're all learning to work remotely. What kind of long-term threat does that pose in terms of demand, corporate demand, for the big global carriers?
Of course, we see a risk of a slow recovery that would be triggered by two elements. First of all, the fear of potential passengers to fly. There is a second point also. Is in addition to that, there is obviously everywhere in the world a slowdown, even a recession. So the cumulative action of recession plus a reluctance of passengers to take the flight again could slow down the recovery. And our hypothesis is that the recovery is not a V-shape as it was in previous pandemics, so quick and strong, but could be slower, more a U-shaped curve that would be the recovery profile.
Mr. Tijaniak, one final quick question. Emirates is going to get a slug of cash from Dubai. We're going to see different schemes being put in place in different parts of the world. Do you think we end up with a level playing field for airlines when we come out of this?
We will probably end up with a different playing field, with probably slightly more consolidation, because we will see some bankruptcy, probably. Secondly, if the states are injecting cash through capital increase or through buying shares, we will see more public participation or public stakeholdings in the airline. So it will probably change the attitude towards the state-owned or the partially state-owned companies, because many companies will have public shareholding in their capital.
Yep.
So could change.
Yeah, it was interesting to see what happened with some of the banks after the great financial crisis. RBS, big state holding, that was a tough thing to manage. Mr. Tijaniak, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Balance of Power. David Alexander Tijaniak, the Director General of IATA. Back to you.
Thank you so very much, Guy, for that really interesting and important interview. And now it's time for Bloomberg First Word News. For that, we turn to Mark Crumpton. Mark?
David, a grim milestone for the United States. The U.S. death toll from the coronavirus is now more than 3,500, eclipsing China's official count. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said today that deaths in New York State had risen more than 300 from the day before, now topping 1,500. The governor's brother, CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, has been infected with the coronavirus. CNN says he's feeling well and work from home. New York City is getting help from the federal government in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, is sending 250 ambulances to New York City, staffed by 500 paramedics and medical technicians to help its fire department respond to an unprecedented number of medical calls. New York City has also reported its first virus death of a person under the age of 18. The European Union is telling its member countries not to forget about human rights as they fight the coronavirus pandemic. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's comments came a day after Hungary's parliament approved a bill giving the government extraordinary powers with no end date in response to the pandemic. France has also passed a law increasing the prime minister's powers, a move harshly criticized by human rights groups. The Trump administration is reviewing some waivers on U.S. sanctions against Iran. Russian and European and Chinese companies will be allowed to continue to work on Iran's civilian nuclear sites without penalty. The U.S. says restrictions on Iran's atomic work remain in place. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had opposed extending the waivers, but Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin argued it was a way to help Iran deal with the coronavirus outbreak. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Orlando, Florida is a city that really depends on tourism. We're going to talk with its mayor, Buddy Dyer, about how it's faring during this time of the coronavirus. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
If you promise to cover...
I used to be a bit of a rubbish sleeper. I'd toss and turn all night. Somehow, I could never find the comfy bit of the mattress. It was a proper nightmare. That's what brought me here. Testing mattresses in the Witch Test Lab. We use a custom-made barrel rolling machine to simulate a decade's worth of use. And the mattresses that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your bedroom. Witch.co.uk. Our tests find you the best.
The moves may be choreographed, but the drama is real.
I dare you! I beg you to come down here right now!
Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown, check out the What's Wrong with Wrestling show. And for a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, listen to Talk is Jericho. For these and more podcasts, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling. Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown to a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks moved down with the S&P now on track for its worst quarter since 2008 as investors debate whether the market meltdown has ended given the continued spread of the new coronavirus. Treasuries are up. The S&P 500 did turn lower in the afternoon session after spending most of the morning higher. We check those numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P 500 is down 0.8%, down 21. The Dow's down 0.75%, down 170. And the NASDAQ is down 0.3%, down 24. The 10-year is up 17.30 seconds with a yield of 0.67%. West Texas Intermediate crude is still in the green, up 1.1% at $20.31 a barrel, while COMEX gold is down 1.8% at $16.1340 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.77, the euro $1.0986, and the British pound is at $1.2414. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett. Now, Balance of Power.
This is Balance of Power, Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Theme parks have closed. Tourism is brought to a stop, which means that Orlando, Florida really is hurting right now. And we are joined by its mayor. He's Buddy Dyer. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for joining us today. Before we get to the economics of this for Orlando and for Orange County, give us a sense about the people there. What is the state of the coronavirus in your city right now?
We have 300 cases as of yesterday in Orange County, so we are the fourth most impacted county in the state of Florida right now. The South Florida counties of Miami-Dade, Broward, and West Palm having a lot more cases than we do, but we're starting to certainly feel the impact, and right now we don't have enough testing ability to really know what's out there, so 300 could be 600 or 900 for all we really know here. But we issued a stay-at-home order last week, and people are abiding by that. We allowed essential businesses to stay open. But we recognized early on that we needed to do some things. So before St. Patrick's Day, we closed the bars and limited the restaurants, and then subsequently closed the restaurants to takeout only. So we took some preliminary actions, not having big parties on St. Patrick's Day, that I think really helped us out.
And you and your counterpart in Orange County, working together, as far as I could tell, really moved quickly on that, fairly aggressively. The governor of the state is taking a somewhat different approach, sort of doing it piecemeal, or sort of county by county, as it were. I guess the south of the state also has very big problems. Is that approach helping you or hurting you, that the governor is not statewide saying, let's just shut it down?
Well, if I had my druthers, I'd obviously rather see the entire state follow a stay-at-home approach, because if people are getting infected in some of the other neighboring counties, and we don't even have consistency through the I-4 counties. Hillsborough and Pinellas have issued stay-at-home orders. Osceola has. I know you already, it probably doesn't know all these counties by name, but Tampa, St. Petersburg, and then Orlando and Kissimmee have issued stay-at-home orders, but none of the other surrounding counties have done so.
So as we know, the large companies such as Disney have closed down the theme parks, but they're very large companies. They have very deep balance sheets. There are a lot of small businesses that are ancillary to that tourism business. How are they faring right now? And can they hope to get money out of the federal government, this $2 trillion grant from last Friday, in time?
So our small businesses are really hurting, just like I think most areas around the state, but we do have a lot that were tied to the tourism economy. There's a lot of people that have been laid off here. As I understand the federal package, there is aid for those people that were making less than $75,000 a year, and the business loan packages relate to keeping employees on. But we have a lot of restaurants that have laid a lot of people off, so there are a lot of people that are looking for ways to make ends meet right now.
At the same time, Mr. Mayor, it must put a lot of burden on your social services at the same time. People need a lot of help right now. How are the finances of Orlando doing?
The city of Orlando itself, we're largely property tax driven. So our city government budget has not been affected in the way some other either state governments or local governments that are more reliant on sales tax. So, and we have a substantially large reserve. We've always been very financially strong, and being a state that's prone to hurricanes, we've always recognized the importance of having money set away to use in emergencies, and this would certainly qualify. I guess that's another thing to think about here in Orlando. I've been mayor now for 17 years, so I've been through 5 or 6 hurricanes. I've been through the Pulse shooting, and this is an entirely different type of situation where it's not localized just to Orlando. It's got its grips on the entire country, actually the entire world. So we're in a boat with a whole lot of other communities, and we're struggling for resources that everybody's competing for.
It also strikes me it's different from a hurricane, that a hurricane, as devastating as it is, as tragic it can be, you know that there's a day, 2, 3, 4 days down the road where the sun's going to shine again. We don't know about the sun shining here. How are your hospitals doing?
Our hospitals are not overrun yet because we have not reached whatever the top of the curve is going to be for us. That's projected 4 or 5 weeks from now. So we're trying to take every measure that we possibly can to flatten the curve and make sure that whatever that peak is, our hospitals and healthcare professionals are able to accommodate that. And our citizens, we're used to working together. And in some respects, they're looking for the leadership, being told what's the best way that they can help out. And we've let them know staying at home and only going out for essential trips is the most important thing that they can do to shorten that time frame that we can't see on the horizon.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, thank you so very much for joining us. That's Buddy Dyer. He is the long-term mayor of Orlando, Florida. Coming up here, we have at least a candidate for a possible vaccine against the virus. And HHS is going to play a critical role. We talked with former HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius about that. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
There are times.
At Dell, when we created the new XPS 13 laptop, we treated every little piece like it was everything. We crafted every part as if it were the most important thing we'd ever made. The result? Something you'll have to see to believe. Pity this is radio. See the new award-winning Dell XPS 13 at dell.co.uk. Every little thing is everything.
The moves may be choreographed, but the drama is real.
I dare you, I beg you to come down here right now!
Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown, check out the What's Wrong with Wrestling show. And for a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, listen to Talk is Jericho. For these and more podcasts, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling. Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown to a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the Favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
On this week's On the Media, we are awash in messages, but some messengers are more effective than others.
Ventilators, ventilators, ventilators. We need 30,000.
Meanwhile, some media outlets choose not to air the president's press briefings live, and media critics ponder what's the right balance between good information and all information. All that and more on this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast on TuneIn today.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. We learned yesterday that Johnson & Johnson, working together with an arm of the Health and Human Services Department, that is BARDA, has come up with what they think is a promising candidate for a vaccine against the coronavirus. They're going to try to test it as early as September, maybe get something out in case of success as early next year. We are joined now by Kathleen Sebelius, who was Secretary of HHS under President Barack Obama, and of course before that, Governor of the state of Kansas. So, Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. I must say I had not followed BARDA very much. Could you explain to us exactly what their role is in this and what the process is for identifying and then testing out a vaccine?
Sure. Well, David, good to be with you. And BARDA is a little known but very, very important entity within HHS. It is, the name stands for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, and it's within the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response that has a broad coordination for, as it says, responding to emergencies, natural and man-made and pathogens and biological attacks. So BARDA is an entity that is directed to coordinate three very important HHS agencies: the National Institutes of Health, and people have gotten very familiar with Tony Fauci, who leads the institute designed for vaccine development. The Food and Drug Administration, that has the regulatory agency within HHS that has the responsibility of actually making sure that medicines are safe, effective, they do the clinical trials, and they eventually give the okay to distributing any kind of medication to the public, and the Centers for Disease Control, that is really the public health backbone of the United States Health Department. They're the epidemiologists. They track, surveil, and mitigate situations. So BARDA has a coordination responsibility, and they really are charged with getting as quickly as possible safe and effective medical countermeasures prepared, sometimes just to put in the stockpile. They do a lot of analysis of what may be coming down the road, of what we're seeing, of what we may need. But in this case, they would be the agency charged with, if you will, taking down, all the barriers, making sure agencies are talking to each other and coordinating as fast as possible federal response.
Yeah, fast as possible. That's what I was going to ask about, because in talking to Alex Gorski, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson yesterday, he said they hope to have field trials started in September. And if that happens, and in success, we don't know it'll work, but they think it's promising, then they'd have a vaccine perhaps in the second quarter of next year. Is there any way to compress that without running undue risk or concern?
Probably not. Unfortunately, we're in a situation, there is no coronavirus vaccine. So when I was secretary, we had the H1N1 outbreak, a flu strain that hadn't been seen since 1918. But the good news on the vaccine side was that there were flu vaccines. Every year, scientists projected what was the likely flu strain and tweaked the annual vaccine. So we could actually kind of tag onto that process and develop a much faster vaccination. This really starts from scratch. And so testing, first of all, safety, and then testing efficacy, does it really work, is a process that really takes some time.
You can't rush it very much. So thank you so much to former Secretary of HHS Kathleen Spiro. She's going to stay with us in the second hour of Balance of Power over on radio. This is Balance of Power for our TV and
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury. If you're newly working from home, you may already be asking yourself, do I dress up for a digital check-in? What if I'm the boss? Is wearing a sport coat while working from the couch borderline insanity? Strange questions, sure, but we live in strange times. Some savvy brands are leveraging these uncharted waters to push a new type of hybridized clothing that straddles the line between formal and casual. In other words, a blazer that's actually sweatpants. One such brand, Nice Stuff, offers $345 blazers and casual knits, while a British clothier is making a drawstring suit. French luxury goods maker LVMH says its revenue dropped as much as 20% in the latest quarter. Luxury goods struggled to find their footing, even during the coronavirus outbreak's earliest days at the beginning of the year, when it spread across China, although shopping is starting to pick up once more in certain markets. Visit BloombergPursuits.com for more. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio. You're living in a world built on science, political and economic.
You've got to believe the labour market gets hit.
Computer and medical.
Clarify where we are on a test.
It all makes a difference.
What do you think needs to happen in terms of governmental response?
And it's all here.
He expects the virus to peak quite a long time from now.
Get your science straight.
The hand-washing campaign, is this actually a good strategy?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
If you love them enough to listen to them practice the same song on tuba,
please be done.
Over and over and over and over and over, then surely you'll check NHTSA.gov/the right seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.
Sounds good, honey.
Check today at NHTSA.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and to finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is another down day on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all declining. In fact, only hours to go until we wrap up the first quarter. S&P 500 index on track for its worst quarter since 2008 as investors debate whether the market meltdown has ended given the continued spread of the new coronavirus. Treasuries rose. We've got the 10-year up 22.30 seconds. Yield now 0.65%. Stocks lower across the board, giving up earlier gains. S&P down 24, a drop of 0.9%. The Dow is down 190 points, down 0.9%. And NASDAQ is lower by 29 points. That is a drop of 0.4%. Gold down 1.5% right now, $25.22 an ounce at $15.97. West Texas Intermediate crude is pushing higher now. WTI up by 0.5% at $20.21. And with more on the commodities picture, here's Bloomberg's Renita Young.
Crude oil is reacting to Chinese manufacturing data that beat expectations today, but crude prices are headed for their worst quarter ever. Morgan Stanley reduced its price forecasts and sees global oil demand falling by 5 million barrels a day this year. Meanwhile, haven demand means gold is heading for a 6th straight quarterly gain. That's the longest stretch since 2011. Bloomberg Intelligence says April will likely bring gold higher to breach the $1,900 an ounce threshold. Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
Goldman Sachs Group expects the U.S. economy to experience a far deeper slump than previously anticipated as the coronavirus pandemic hammers businesses, causing a wave of mass unemployment. Economists led by Jan Hatzius expect the world's largest economy will shrink an annualized 34% in the second quarter. And Chinese manufacturing activity rebounded strongly in March, signaling that the world's second largest economy is restarting just as it faces a growing threat from slumping external demand. 102 on Wall Street. Time now for the Market Drivers Report with a focus on American depository receipts. And here is Dave Wilson.
Thanks, Charlie. ADRs are hanging on to gains. Unlike U.S. shares, the S&P ADR index is up 0.1%, and the S&P 500 is lower by 0.8%. The UK's Imperial Brands has risen about 10.5% in U.S. trading. The tobacco company said the coronavirus pandemic hasn't hurt business and sales are in line with projections. Another UK-based company, WPP, has added 6.3%. Analysts said an update from the advertising agency owner showed its performance in China wasn't as bad as expected. WPP withdrew full-year forecasts and suspended dividends and stock buybacks. French rival Publicis Group has gained 8.8%. French bank ADRs, on the other hand, are lower on anticipation that the lenders will suspend dividends in keeping with a directive from the European Central Bank. BNP Paribas is down 6.9%. Societe Generale is down 4.7%. And Crédit Agricole is down 3.4%. And the UK's Amarin has plunged 70%. A U.S. judge invalidated 6 patents on the heart medicine Vascepa, which accounts for almost all the company's revenue. The ruling opens the door to lower-cost versions of the drug, Charlie.
All right, we thank you very much. Dave Wilson reporting. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy holding his daily coronavirus update. Let's get the latest now as we listen in to Governor Murphy.
And then we will fill in some details as we go from there. For the past 24 hours, we are reporting an additional 2,196 positive test results. So our statewide count stands at 18,696. Again, 2,196 positive test results overnight since yesterday, a total of 18,696 in total. And we continue to lose invaluable members of our New Jersey family to COVID-19 related complications, and this does not get any easier to speak to, never mind live through. Since yesterday, another 69 residents have died, and that total now stands at 267, each of them a precious life lost from our New Jersey family. A couple of taking that number, of which is a big one, and putting a face to it, maybe in a couple of different ways. One of those precious souls lost was Passaic firefighter Israel Tolentino Jr. He became a firefighter about a year and a half ago. He had been a volunteer before that. He had served as an EMT. He was only 33 years old. I spoke to his wife, Maria, earlier. They have 2 children, Ilani, who I think is 9, and Israel, who is 7. I also spoke to his Chief Trentacost, as well as exchanged notes with the mayor of Passaic, Hector Laura. By all accounts, an incredible guy, and somebody who we mourn with his family and friends. We keep his family in our prayers, as we do every single New Jersey family who was dealing with the absolute worst part from this emergency. Another name, another young person. You may have read about Ben Luderer, who was the head baseball coach at Cliffside Park, 30 years old. A star in that famous Don Bosco Prep, I think, undefeated team of 2008. They were number 1 in the nation. He went on and played at Marist. To his wife, Brandy, and to his family, God rest his soul. Just stop for a second. You just heard about a 33-year-old and a 30-year-old. Now you're going to hear from Judy when she goes through the dimensions of the fatalities, that those are on the somewhat exception side, that clearly the demographic that is older is the one that's being hit the hardest. But may I just repeat to everybody who's listening, this is a reality for all of us. This is not abstract, no matter how good our health is, no matter how young we might be. And by the way, even if it doesn't impact you, never mind kill you, you may unwittingly carry this virus and pass it on to someone else who you hold dear. So to each of Israel and Ben, and to all the other 67 folks who we lost overnight, bless their hearts. The disease has taken service members, first responders, coaches, loved ones, many friends, and too many New Jerseyans, and sadly, we know that this number will grow. I cannot be any clearer in my call. Stay at home before this hits home, like it has now for 267 of our families. Please do your part to flatten this curve that we showed you yesterday, and think of what we saw and the totality of where this could go if it was left unchecked, and where social distancing can take us. Again, the chart on the left, best judgment. Again, this is as of yesterday. This changes every day. But look at where this virus would have taken us had we not stayed at home, had we not done everything we can to flatten the curve. And you see on the left, needing as many as just under 80,000 hospital beds, and there's no state in America that has the wherewithal or the resources to come up with that sort of a peak and surge and meet it. But look at the chart on the right. That's just if we behave as an average state based on past pandemics. That's what we can do. Now, the blue line that surges at the top is still north of that red line that's straight underneath it. The red line is the current capacity of hospital beds, and the blue line is the surge, but that's an average result. I repeat, we are not an average state. We are the quintessential all come together, one family, we can do the impossible state. That is New Jersey. And our job collectively is to stay at home, keep social distancing, and flatten the hell out of that curve to get it as close down to that red line as humanly possible. Let's all stay in this together. Let's prevent more losses like Israel and Ben and other blessed souls who have lost their lives. If we do our part, we can meaningfully slow the spread and save lives, and we can lessen the strain at the same time on our healthcare system and on our communities. And as we always do, we thank everyone on the front lines, especially the unsung and overlooked heroes who are out there working in our communities. And this is beyond the healthcare workers who are heroes, the first responders who are heroes. But how about the home health aides, sanitation workers, the retail employees in essential places of business to whom we've referred to before, the Teamsters and the truck drivers and the transit workers. Their commitment and dedication to the rest of us means the world, and it means that we know we will emerge from this stronger. But let's also help them. And how do we help them? We help them by staying home and doing our part to slow the spread of COVID-19. This isn't about you, it's about us. I've said it many times. I know this isn't fun, but now is the time to be selfless, not selfish, and for all of us to pull together. We accept and understand the anxiety, the cabin fever, the impatience, the restlessness, the unknowns. We get all that. The very best thing we can do together. And by the way, we'll shoot straight with you on what the facts are, where we are, and where we're headed. But the very best far and away thing any of us can do is to stay home and keep your distance from anybody else, even while you're at home. Okay, with that said, please allow me to switch gears a couple of times before I ask and invite my colleagues to speak. Tomorrow, Wednesday, April 1st, the PNC Bank Arts Center drive-through site, operating in partnership with FEMA, will open at 8 a.m. again for symptomatic New Jersey residents only. The Bergen County Community College testing site will be closed tomorrow. Again, we're in an on-off, hoping to accomplish the same amount of tests in aggregate, but to do it in a more coherent way. Additionally, 3 more county-sponsored sites either have or are preparing to open, and I'll go north to south. I've been in touch with each of them, and it's all good news as we continue to aggressively open up our testing regime again for symptomatic persons. In a perfect world, the federal government would give us all the testing material we need, all the personal protective equipment that we need, and we could be like South Korea. From moment one, we realized that wasn't the case. We didn't have that level of material and support from the federal government. So we made the decision, for obvious personal health reasons, to test symptomatic people only. And by the way, that has an added benefit to the colleagues to my right, because that's the most valuable data we can get, both positives and negatives, and Judy will go through both in a minute. That allows us to best get our arms around this and get out ahead of it. So, starting tomorrow, Middlesex County, in partnership with the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission, is opening a drive-through site located at the MVC's Kilmer Vehicle Inspection Center in Edison. That site will be open 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Testing there is by appointment only, and you must be both a Middlesex County resident and exhibiting symptoms of respiratory illness. The appointment window is now open, and you can find more information at middlesexcountynj.gov/COVID-19 testing. Again, that's middlesexcountynj.gov/COVID-19 testing, or you can call 732-745-3100. 732-745.
We have been listening to New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy give his briefing live. He first started out with the number of cases they have, which are on the rise in New Jersey, also the 267 deaths they've had so far. He spent a little time putting some names and some faces to those people, fellow New Jerseyans who have passed away. He gave some numbers about what could happen in the state, but said that we are not the average state. We can do better than that because he is concerned, as everyone is, with overtaxing the hospitals. He urged people to stay home, and as we've come to understand what it means, flatten the curve. He is concerned about the stress on hospitals, and then he started to go through specifics of New Jersey about various testing sites around the state. Once again, that's been Governor Phil Murphy of the state of New Jersey. And now we go to Charlie Pellet for a business flash.
Hi, thank you very much, David Weston. Stocks lower across the board. S&P 500 index turned lower in the afternoon session, led by banking and technology shares after spending most of the morning higher after a consumer confidence measure and a regional manufacturing reading fell less than expected. S&P 500 on track for its worst quarter since 2008. We've got less than 3 hours to go until we wrap up the quarter. Right now, the Dow is down 181 points, down 0.8%. S&P is down 23, a drop there of 0.9%, while NASDAQ is down 25, a decline of 0.3%. 10-year up 21.30 seconds with a yield of 0.65%. Gold now lower by 1.8%, $15.92 the ounce. Crude oil higher today, little changed, holding close to $20.34 a barrel, up now by 25 cents. So again, recapping, equities lower, S&P 500 index down 24 points, a drop there of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. I'm David Weston. The Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees those accused of crimes a speedy trial. But what happens to the speed of those trials when social distancing keeps everyone from leaving their houses? We welcome now Jordan Rubin. He's legal reporter for Bloomberg Law, who's written on this subject for the Bloomberg. Jordan, welcome. So give us a sense of exactly what the requirements are, because there's the constitutional requirement, Sixth Amendment. There's also, as I recall, a statute called the Speedy Trial Act.
Sure. There is a Speedy Trial Act that does require cases to get to trial within a certain amount of time if a defendant does want a trial. However, there's a provision in that law that we're seen used a lot lately, and that's the interest of justice provision, which essentially lets judges push trials off in certain situations. It's essentially a catch-all provision, and we're seeing that being used in this novel coronavirus situation where it's practically impossible to have jury trials.
So is there a plan about what to do about this? And if so, who's coming up with the plan?
Right. So the answer is yes and no. The plan, obviously, is to try and balance a criminal defendant's right with this novel public safety issue that we're in. And so we're seeing judges issue orders essentially putting off trials for a certain period of time, not indefinitely, but say for a period of weeks or a month, something of that nature. And so the plan really seems to be taking it day by day, just as we're doing in every other facet of life. This just happens to be in a super important context of a criminal trial.
Well, as a practical matter, if I'm a defense counsel and I have a client who's in prison and whose trial is delayed, can I get a hearing on that? I mean, normally you can go into, for habeas corpus, for example, you can go in, but I can't go into the courtroom, can I? I mean, how do I get hold of a judge?
Well, you're touching on yet another issue here, which is the fact that even put aside the trials, which are practically impossible to happen given social distancing concerns, even just the fact of having routine pretrial hearings like you're alluding to, that's being upended by the virus as well. So we do see courts are turning to different teleconferencing and video type experiments, but even something like what you're alluding to here and getting a hearing itself is being complicated by this virus issue.
Is there any consideration for people actually consenting to do remote trials? Because a lot of these prisoners are in situations that might, just being in the prison, expose them to coronavirus. We may be jeopardizing some of the people who are waiting trial.
So we're seeing some movement towards certain proceedings being potentially taking place over video or audio components. However, a trial itself, that I have not yet seen, and that's something that's difficult to imagine taking place, although we are in an unprecedented situation, so who knows. But so much of a trial involves this human element and gauging credibility in person and really being there. So above all else, a jury trial is so difficult to imagine taking place if no one is in the same room.
Well, and if memory serves, the Constitution not only provides for a speedy trial, but also the right to confront your accuser. I'm not sure exactly how you could confront your accuser as a practical matter.
That's yet another issue that you're hitting on. And so we've seen in certain aspects of testimony in special situations, say where a witness is out of the country or otherwise unavailable, perhaps a witness will video in. Even that's incredibly rare. But that's just one component of the larger trial where the whole jury is at least in the room. But we can't even do that. So really this core function is really taken out from under us in terms of not being able to have these trials.
To the best of your knowledge, Jordan, have any defense counsel pressed the case at this point? I mean, have there been any rulings from federal district court judges about how to handle this situation?
I've spoken to lawyers who said that they're going to be filing challenges on speedy trial grounds. However, I don't know how optimistic they are, given this interest of justice catch-all exception and the fact that we really are in this national emergency. And so really, what is a judge supposed to do? You have this defendant who is obligated, who has an obligation to take advantage of a trial if they want to, but you also have the health of citizens, of the jurors, to think about. So it's really almost an impossible situation.
Yeah, it is about an impossible situation, but there are so many these days. Thank you so much to Jordan Rubin. He is a legal reporter for Bloomberg Law. Well, the country looks to Washington for leadership in fighting the coronavirus, but many of the most important decisions come at the state level, and our governors work to coordinate with the federal government and with one another under growing stresses and strains. Kathleen Sebelius has done both as governor of the state of Kansas and then as President Barack Obama's Secretary of Health and Human Services, and she's remained with us from the first hour of Balance of Power. So, Madam Secretary, thank you so much for your patience, for staying with us. We've talked in the past about the response at the federal level. It has changed over time. What do you make of it now? Are they doing better than they were 2-3 weeks ago?
Well, I certainly hope so. I'm in close touch with our governor, who's been a longtime friend of mine, and the federal government just acceded to her request and granted Kansas a disaster declaration. I'm alarmed by the fact that we still have an administration who seems to be criticizing in a very partisan way governors who actually make requests on behalf of their citizens, who has suggested as recently as 2 days ago, if governors are not appreciative to him, then somehow their calls should not be returned. That's a really alarming message from a president at the time of a pandemic, because the federal government has very unique resources. States provide the frontline response, can mobilize resources within their own state, but they don't have the financial leverage, they don't have the purchasing leverage, they don't have the distribution leverage, the logistics that the federal government has. So if this is going to be a partisan battle about who is kinder to Donald Trump, who is nicer to Donald Trump, who praises Donald Trump the most, we're in a terrifying situation.
It's a really interesting and important point, I think. I've not been a governor, unlike you. You've been a governor, but I've looked at these governors and wondered, how do you try to work with the administration when you have, and I'll take one from my home state of Michigan, when President Trump was quite critical of Governor Whitmer, and Governor Whitmer has a big problem on her hands up there in Detroit and Michigan.
You bet. I mean, she's doing exactly what a governor should do, being very honest about the situation, being very forthright about what is needed, asking for resources and supplies, making it clear that they don't have enough testing, that they don't have enough backup, that they don't have enough protective equipment. And if that is seen as a hostile gesture, I was governor at a time when President Bush was deploying our National Guard troops to Iraq and Afghanistan. Governors are the CEOs of the state, but also the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. And when those deployments were made, their equipment went with them, and it left states pretty vulnerable to respond to natural disasters. So we had a tornado in the midst of the war in Iraq, and not only were our National Guard troops gone, but all the stuff that they had, earth movers and various things, were gone too. When I made that request to the federal government that we needed not only help and support, but we needed supplies, there was initially a bit of pushback saying, well, wait a minute, you've got all the supplies. And when I documented the fact that, of course, we didn't, because they were in Afghanistan at the time, and we didn't have them, there was an immediate kind of response from the federal government that they deployed things from elsewhere. This is a situation where all governors are in this together. We've always been able to help one another. You know, if some state has a flood or a disaster, you could send supplies from another state. This is now everybody is looking at the same situation, and whether they have the outbreak that Michigan or New York has or New Orleans has today, they're going to have it. And you really can't set up a competition or a, partisan food fight. It has to be that the federal government is looked at as the equitable distributor of goods, as the resource who will gather the goods and put them out. Because, David, I got to tell you, we're just starting this. I mean, wait till we get a vaccine. The vaccines are not going to come all at the same time. They will be hopefully coming as quickly as possible, but the manufacturing won't be able to make all the doses we need simultaneously. So unless the federal government is a trusted and equitable distributor of resources, we're in for a really terrible time.
Yeah, it's a really important point. I mean, even now with the medical supplies and equipment and things like that, one wonders why the federal government isn't playing something of a larger role in really allocating these things. As we talk to people, it's sort of almost first come, first served, which doesn't work very well. We really appreciate your staying with us, Madam Secretary. You've been very patient, and it's very important to have you on. That's former HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. Now, coming up here, we're going to be talking about a fourth round of fiscal spending to cushion the blow from for the economy. We've already had 3 rounds. We had $2.2 trillion passed last Friday, and now we're talking about a fourth round. We're going to talk with Alex Vogel of the Vogel Group about the prospects for that. He was the chief counsel to Bill Frist when Bill Frist was Senate Majority Leader. Beg your pardon. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are falling, with the S&P 500 on track to record its worst quarter since 2008. The Dow is dropping 178 points, S&P down 22, the Nasdaq losing 30 points. U.S. consumers are far less confident about what life will be like for job seekers and businesses in 6 months, and the Conference Board's confidence survey also finds a sharp drop in overall confidence this month. Furloughs are increasing in the retail industry. More than 500,000 chain store workers have been told they're being temporarily laid off. And we're not shopping in the same way we used to. A company that tracks our spending online is reporting a surge in grocery sales. Adobe Analytics says those doubled in the first couple of weeks of this month. Also up sharply are orders for computers and at-home fitness gear. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
You're fierce. You take care of business and don't hold back. Taking care of your health shouldn't be any different. You know when something's off. Don't ignore symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, and rashes. Listen to your body. It could be lupus. We're here to help you take control. Learn how at BeFierceTakeControl.org. Brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of America and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscription.
Cheating or competing? When it comes to business, do you know the difference? Say you run into a competitor at an industry event. You get to chatting about business, how you're both doing. All pretty standard. Now talk turns to margins. Maybe someone mentions prices. Maybe you agree to stop undercutting each other. Still just business, right? Wrong. Coordinating prices with your competitors is called price fixing. It's cheating and illegal. And you could be facing big fines or even prison when you get caught. Search cheating or competing to check your business practices before we check them for you. Brought to you by the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority.
Listen to Raj go. Polyrhythm, paradiddle. A drum solo so epic, he nearly forgot his mom's birthday back in Delhi. Good thing Raj has Western Union on his phone. and can send money quickly online. Download the app today. This service is provided by Western Union. FX gains apply.
On this week's On the Media, we are awash in messages, but some messengers are more effective than others.
Ventilators, ventilators, ventilators. We need 30,000.
Meanwhile, some media outlets choose not to air the president's press briefings live, and media critics ponder what's the right balance between good information and all information. All that and more on this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast on TuneIn today.
Are you curious what others are listening to on TuneIn? Head to the trending section under Browse to see the most popular stations and podcasts among TuneIn listeners right now. Check it out. You might just discover something new for yourself.
Want to know a great way to discover the latest and greatest sports audio on TuneIn? It's easy. Just make sure push notifications are enabled on your phone to receive recommendations of sports talk, radio, and podcasts, along with important breaking news updates.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Not all heroes wear capes, but most wear tights.
And here we go. Now it's underway. Cover. Oh, Rowan. Wait a second.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis of the latest WrestleMania, turn on the WWE podcast. Or listen to the Steve Austin Show for no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities.
It's good to be here tonight. It's an empty building.
For these and more, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling.
Advisor Solutions, LLC, are both members of FINRA and SIPC.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Cole Bear. Filling in for Smokey, because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Have you ever thought, I wish I'd had that information sooner?
Talk to us about applications.
Let's fix that.
You own a number of brands.
Bloomberg Business Week, weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg Business Week, now live on YouTube. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Coming up on Balance of Power, we've had 3 rounds of extraordinary spending from Congress. How long until we get a 4th? We talk with Alex Vogel of the Vogel Group. But first, let's get a market check with Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, David Weston. 2.5 hours to go until we wrap up the first quarter of 2020. What a quarter it has been. Stocks are trading lower. S&P 500 index on track for its worst quarter since 2008 as investors debate whether the market meltdown has ended given the continued spread of the new coronavirus. Right now, the S&P is down 30 points. That is a drop of 1.2%. The Dow is slumping 236 points, down 1.1%. And NASDAQ is lower by 47 points, a drop there of 0.6%. The 10-year up 24/30 seconds with a yield of 0.64% now on the 10-year. Gold is down 2%, lower by $32 the ounce at $15.90. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 0.6%, higher by 11 cents now. That is a gain right now of, again, 0.7%, a barrel of WTI at $20.25. A major Wall Street bank sees a steeper drop in U.S. economic output after the White House extended social distancing guidelines to the end of April. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Efforts to contain the coronavirus are causing widespread shutdowns and job furloughs. Goldman Sachs sees America's economy contracting by 34% in the second quarter and unemployment rising to 15%. That's a far weaker scenario than the firm previously anticipated. Goldman Sachs sees the economy beginning a recovery in the third quarter with GDP expanding by 19%. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
The industry group IATA is predicting airlines will burn through as much as $61 billion worldwide in the second quarter, warning that carriers could run out of cash as travel hits a low point in the coronavirus crisis. Checking some of the airline names, UAL, parent of United, it is up today by 6.2%. In fact, airlines higher across the board here. American Airlines Group up by 0.9%. Delta up 1.7%. Southwest up by 2.6%. JetBlue up by 0.6%. Recapping, equities lower. S&P down now by 28 points, a drop there of 1.1%. Balance of power continues, and once again, here's your host, David Weston.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. It's been only 4 days since Congress sent a bill injecting over $2 trillion into the U.S. economy. And already the talk has turned to when the next one will come and what will be in it when it does come. We welcome now Alex Vogel of the Vogel Group. Mr. Vogel served as chief counsel to Senator Bill Frist when Bill Frist was the Senate Majority Leader. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. How come we're talking about another bill so quickly?
It's amazing that we've just barely digested $2 trillion in what's known as Phase 3, and people have already moved on to talk Phase 4 and beyond. I think it's a testament to both the range of industries and issues that are affected and the recognition that literally every day new economic wrinkles are coming to the surface, and you simply can't address all of them in any one package.
So I talked with the speaker last week, actually, and she said that the next one, and she said there would be another one. She called it, would be actually the recovery part, that this has really just been mitigating what's happened already, the damage was done, it's recovery. What sorts of things are we talking about? One of the things we talked about was infrastructure. President Trump this morning tweeted he'd be in favor of $2 trillion for infrastructure.
Yeah, there's something of a long-running joke in Washington for the last 2.5 years that we're always waiting for Infrastructure Week. This may actually be the opportunity. I think the speaker's construct is right in that the first two pieces of this are really focused on the real near-term employee benefits issues. Phase 3 was obviously focused on injecting some cash into people and companies' pockets to get them through this near term. And then Phase 4 really is looking at the stimulus, getting the economy going again. And certainly a big piece of that has been discussed is infrastructure. There is no doubt that it would be stimulative. There's no doubt there's an appetite for it. The question on a lot of people's minds is, what does that appetite look like, having just spent $2 trillion? And there are a range of issues that need to be addressed that, frankly, aren't connected to infrastructure stimulus. For example, there are insurance issues that have cropped up that were not addressed in the initial Phase 3 that may need to be dealt with as well. They could be dealt with as part of that Phase 4 infrastructure package, but I think that probably makes it more likely there'll be yet another one after that.
We've had 3 rounds, as you say, and we've basically gotten past partisanship. It's poked its head up every once in a while, but it hasn't been crippling to the process. Is in a Phase 4, does partisanship start to come back into it? And let me be very specific. For an example, on infrastructure, you'll recall the president actually had a deal Senator Schumer and with Nancy Pelosi on infrastructure, but there was a problem on how you pay for it. Have we sort of gotten past that, or would the Republicans up in the Senate and the House, even though if the president wants to borrow money for it, would the Republicans balk at borrowing more money for infrastructure?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I agree with the sentiment that, and it's a positive, and I'm glad to see it. A lot of normal partisan bickering has faded around some of these issues in the response. On things like infrastructure spending, historically, a lot of the partisan back and forth has been over how to pay for it, and in many ways, we are now in a period where that's no longer the issue. We're going to do it. And so I still think you will see, as you've seen in some of the phase 3 provisions, there are some partisan issues that pop up and need to be addressed. The Democrats insisted on some union-friendly provisions in some of the loans and other things. So I think you'll see that, but I don't think it will be focused now, at least, on how to pay for it. There is a point at which those who are worried, not only traditionally worried about deficits, but frankly near-term worried about filling some of these holes, are going to raise that issue. I think, frankly, though, that may be bipartisan. And I do think we are in something of a temporary post-partisan moment.
Well, and filling the holes, one of the ones that people seem to be talking about is aid to the states. There is some aid to the states in the round 3, if we call it that. But people think that we're still short some on the states really need a lot of help here.
Yeah, and you've heard that directly from people like Governor Cuomo, who talked about, he's got a $15 billion hole and growing, and $3 billion is not going to cut it. There will definitely be some direct assistance to the states. Some of that, the money that states are having to spend is flowing through the healthcare side, and so it may get addressed there. But I think there will be holes in budgets at all levels of government after this is done.
Let's also talk about something that strikes me at least as potentially very partisan, and that is Nancy Pelosi this morning going on air and saying that she thinks that we should vote by mail come November, and that she wants legislation perhaps included in this 4th round that would make sure the Postal Service had enough resources to get that done. That historically, as I understand it, has been a very partisan issue. Republicans and Democrats tend to have very different views on things like voting by mail.
They do, and those issues have been debated for years. I was actually on the ground in Oregon just after the 2000 election, dealing with some of the legal fallout from the first vote-by-mail election in this country, which they held. There have been issues. Trying to do that on a nationwide basis is exceedingly complicated under any circumstances, given these time frames and issues even more so. And it is true, anytime you were talking about election administration issues, there is broad concern about election security, ballot access, vote integrity, all of those issues, and they will definitely raise some legitimate sometimes, but nonetheless seemingly partisan objections and concerns. And I do have questions about how such a system could be implemented in time for this election. People have to remember, we don't actually run a national election for president. We run 50 different elections with their own rules and standards and constitutional constructs controlled by the states as well. So that'll be exceedingly complex.
That seems fair to say. Thank you so much, Alex. Really good to have you with us. That is Alex Vogel of the Vogel Group. Coming up, we're going to talk with the Chief Medical Officer for Global Medical Response. They have 38,000 employees providing emergency and patient relocation services throughout the country, and they obviously are working very hard in very dangerous circumstances right now. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the Favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with our Washington correspondent about the many political battles being waged in the Capitol over how to deal with the new coronavirus.
You couldn't imagine a president personalizing a crisis with a virus, but somehow that's where we are.
Susan Glasser. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
It's TuneIn Sports on this day. March 31st, 2004, New York Yankees starter Kevin Brown becomes only the second pitcher in MLB history to have beaten all 30 teams.
Got him over the outside corner. An 11 strikeout night for Kevin Brown. They win it on the arm and of Kevin Brown here tonight. Overwhelming performance by Brown.
To listen to conversations breaking down the moments just like this, search sports to be part of the discussion on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Not all heroes wear capes, but most wear tights.
And here we go. Now it's underway. Cover. Rowan. Wait a second.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis of the latest WrestleMania, turn on the WWE podcast. Or listen to the Steve Austin Show for no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities.
It's good to be here tonight. It's an empty building.
For these and more, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling.
Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong.
Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fair housing. That's HUD.gov/fair housing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are lower across the board after rising 17% over the past 7 days as the S&P 500 index heads toward its worst quarter since the financial crisis. For the quarter, the S&P 500 index is down 19.4%. Today, lower by 0.8%, down 21 points at 2605. NASDAQ is down 16 points. That is a drop of 0.2%. The Dow down 178 points now, lower by 0.8%. 10-year up 25-30 seconds with a yield of 0.64%. Gold up 2% now at $15.89 the ounce. Crude oil up 2.5% right now, up 50 cents a barrel at $20.59. So again, recapping here, equities lower. S&P down 22, a drop of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks so much, Charlie. From New York, this is Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Every day, emergency medical technicians and ambulance technicians are risking their own safety to respond to calls and transport those with COVID-19 to hospitals around the country. And 38,000 of those responding work for Global Medical Response. When you call 911, there's a decent chance that you are getting one of their professionals, and that professional will respond. We welcome now the Chief Medical Officer for Global Medical Response. He's Dr. Ed Recht. So, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Give us a sense of the distribution of your 38,000 or more professionals, where they are, what they're doing right now.
Well, thanks, David. Appreciate that. So we're in 46 states. We have about 38,000 providers. We respond to close to 5.5 million patients in a year. So obviously things are dramatically different today.
What are you seeing in terms of an uptick in the demand? We saw a report today that actually FEMA is sending 250 ambulances with technicians to New York.
Yeah, so like most EMS systems, our volume in those areas where the COVID illness burden has increased has dramatically increased, both the 911 side of the house and what we call interfacility, so moving patients from their original hospital to a secondary hospital or to a different environment. And the traditional 911 calls in many of those communities have decreased. So there's this shift, obviously, away from trauma. And there aren't as many people driving. There aren't as many people out there doing things that create trauma. But our volume for COVID-related conditions has increased dramatically.
We hear a lot about capacity expressed in terms of number of hospital beds, ICU beds, ventilators, things like that. What about capacity in terms of emergency services like ambulances? At what point are we over capacity? We just have a shortage. We can't service everyone we need to service.
So it's a very good question and something that I think nationwide everyone's working on. The good thing about emergency medical services is historically the emergency medical services system has repositioned ambulances, resources, trying to anticipate increases in volume. For example, when storms come through or holiday weekends, there's a way to increase staffing, increase the volume. In this particular circumstance, because we don't know what that end point is, and because the volume is increasing, and because our hospitals are becoming much more full, it creates a new dilemma, trying to find the right resources to get the patients to the right level of care, and then respond to, obviously, the very worried and often sick population. So those principles still apply. We still navigate and increase ambulances and reposition those ambulances. The challenge in this event is frankly the volume and the unpredictable endpoint of that volume.
Is there anything we can do in the short term about that volume? I talked with the CEO of Cigna, David Cordani, yesterday, who said they've seen a dramatic increase in telemedicine and because of the COVID-19 crisis. And he thought we'd never go back there again. Could we be using telemedicine more effectively for some people who don't actually need to go to the hospital?
Absolutely. And this is an illness that can be managed. Certain patients can be managed effectively in their homes or in the non-hospital environment with the right resources, the right clinical resources overseeing their care. From an EMS perspective, we've historically in EMS, we are a transportation benefit, for example, in CMS. So the reimbursement of the ambulance side is when the patient gets moved to the hospital. That's not what we want to do with all those patients today. So using EMTs and paramedics and their skill set to go into those homes to identify, to manage, to coordinate either via telemedicine or direct connection with other healthcare providers to find the best place to manage those patients is ideal. And this particular event would be the perfect clinical scenario to use that skill set of EMTs and paramedics nationally.
What's the process, if there is one, by which if someone calls 911, somebody figures out whether you really need to send an ambulance or not, or telemedicine might be an alternative?
Yeah, so one of the very strong principles of emergency medical services that's worked beautifully is identifying potential acuity based on a limited amount of data. So in most communities, when 911 is activated, there's a series of questions that try and very rapidly identify if someone is critically ill, critically injured, and get the right resources sent to them. As the EMTs and paramedics arrive on the scene of that event, they do exactly the same thing. So in our world, we refer to it as sick or not sick. So they're able to rapidly assess that patient population. So as you can imagine, using that structure, that system to get to the patient side quickly, to evaluate them for the potential need for additional levels of care, that EMT or paramedic can make that decision fairly rapidly. And if they can connect with public health and the healthcare system, the disposition becomes a lot easier for the entire healthcare system.
One of the things you mentioned, Doctor, is that it's not just taking people to the hospital, but repositioning people. I mean, right now we have this in New York City as the hospital ship, the military hospital ship has come and been docked on the Hudson River, that some people who are not COVID-19, not critical, can be moved there. Do you have any sense of what percentage of the transportation you're having to do with EMTs is just from the home to the hospital as opposed to among different hospitals?
So it's difficult to tell right now based on the illness burden of each community, but what we do know is that the numbers of those patients that will be moved from their initial destination facility, so wherever they start, to a secondary facility or even out of the healthcare system to a residence is going to increase as more of the critically ill patients stay in the acute care hospitals and the less ill are moved to other facilities, including, as you pointed out, hospital ships and convention centers and larger areas that historically have not been healthcare providers, but provide a safer environment for folks who are either recuperating or for folks who don't have severe symptoms.
And finally, Doctor, I would be remiss if I didn't inquire about the safety and protection of your people. Where are you on PPE, that personal protective equipment?
So first, thank you for doing that. All of us in the profession appreciate that. It is work to make sure that we have access to that equipment. As everyone knows, it's limited. We are concerned about its availability moving forward and are working aggressively with all of our partners out there to get it. This is the absolute first front line in the healthcare side, and we have to make sure we protect our men and women out there. It's a crucially important factor.
What are you most concerned about? Is it N95 masks? Is it PAPRs? Is it gowns? Is it gloves? What's the critical point that you see right now?
So I'd answer all of the above eventually, but specifically, David, right now, it's N95. It's respiratory protection.
And are you having trouble getting what you need?
At this point, it's a struggle to get it. We are fortunate that the majority of our folks have that.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I really appreciate that. That's Dr. Ed Racht of the Global Medical Response. He is the Chief Medical Officer there. Thank you very much for joining us. That does it for Balance of Power for today. I'm David West on Bloomberg Radio. Next, we're going to have Bloomberg Business Week. And this is Bloomberg Radio.
This week at Tesco, large Easter eggs are 3 for £8. And we've got a large choice too on all your favourite brands, including Terry's Chocolate Orange, Cadbury's and Maltesers. At 3 for £8, why shell out more? Tesco. Every little helps. Available in the majority of larger stores and online. Delivery charges may apply until 13th of April.
Not all heroes wear capes, but most wear tights.
And here we go. Now it's underway. Cover on Rowan. Wait a second.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis of the latest WrestleMania, turn on the WWE podcast. Or listen to the Steve Austin Show for no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities.
It's good to be here tonight. It's an empty building.
For these and more, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling.
Leave it to the New York Times to make the most intelligent pop music podcast out there.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast.
On the Popcast, the Times music staff gets together for a weekly roundtable on the hottest topics in popular music. From award show autopsies and reactions to new releases to difficult-to-process scandals and emerging themes in the music landscape, hear distinguished music critics share their perspectives on the latest music news, songs, albums, and artists of note on the New York Times Popcast. Search and favorite Popcast to join the conversation.
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with our Washington correspondent about the many political battles being waged in the Capitol over how to deal with the new coronavirus.
You couldn't imagine a president personalizing a crisis with a virus, but somehow that's where we are.
Susan Glasser. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
Financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from our homes in New York and New Jersey, streaming on YouTube. Welcome to Bloomberg Business Week. It is Tuesday, March 31st, 2020. We are wrapping up the first quarter. I'm Carol Masser, along with my co-host Jason Kelly. And Jason, safe to say it, everyone is racing for a cure and maybe more stimulus.
Absolutely. And what I thought you were to say is safe to say no one's going to be sad to see March go bye-bye. April could be equally tough, but on to the next quarter, as you say. And it does feel like we had a little bit of a shift as we were looking through the show today. A lot of medical talk, a lot of experts, including from Johns Hopkins. We've relied heavily on them, and they are right in the middle of looking for a cure.
All right, we're going to get to all of that. First up, though, your top business stories, and let's get a check on the trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. Happy Tuesday to you. We've got just about 2 hours to go until we wrap up the quarter. It is a down day. Stocks are falling after rising 17% over the past 7 days. But to put that in context, for the quarter, for the year, the S&P is down 19.3%. Here's where we stand. S&P 500 index down 18 points today. That is a drop of 0.7%. As a reference, the S&P now at 2607. The Dow is down 140 points, a decline there of 0.6%, while NASDAQ lower by 9, a drop today of 0.1%. 10 years up 24.30 seconds, 0.65%. Gold down $32 the ounce, down 2% right now at $15.90. Crude oil pushing higher. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2%, $20.50 a barrel. Again, recapping here, equities lower, S&P final trading day of the quarter down 18 points, a drop of 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser. One of our big guests today, a voice we are eager to hear from, former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. Carol, corporate bailouts. Spoiler alert, he's not in favor.
It's a provocative
Not into
piece.
him.
Yeah, it's a provocative piece that he's written, so I'm really looking forward to a conversation with him. People have been tweeting at me some questions to get to with him as well. And in the middle of all of this, some continue to ask Jason whether we are in an era when China successfully challenges American American really dominancy, being the dominant player on the global stage here. And there's a new book out that tackles just that from Kishore Mahbubani. And so we'll talk about that. He's both an academic and a diplomat. So looking forward to that conversation.
And on a slightly lighter note, and certainly I could tell you from the neighborhood where I'm living in, people are long video games. We're going to look at that from the investment perspective. Maybe that's a place, a little bright spot in these dark days. But first, let's set the Business Week agenda. If we can, Kriti Gupta is with us on the phone in New York City. She works in our cross-asset team looking across everything that is trading out there today. And, of course, Dave Wilson with us, our stocks editor, author of the Chart and Stock of the Day. Dave, set the tone for us. You heard the numbers from Charlie. What's underneath this Tuesday trade, this last day of the quarter?
Well, I mean, you take a look at stocks here, and they've certainly faded a bit as the day has gone on. The S&P 500, not far from its lows of the day. You're in a situation where energy stocks are the standout, but this time they're actually up. I mean, given what's happened with crude. You look at the dividend plays, you might say, the kinds of shares you buy for their payouts, real estate and utilities. They're taking the biggest hits in today's trading. The real estate index within the S&P 500 down almost 5%. Financial shares aren't doing well either. Definitely some weakness in the regional banks. So, it looks like we're kind of stumbling off the stage to some extent, which is in keeping with how the quarter has gone and especially what's been happening this month.
Well, you do notice that we get some back and forth when it comes to the sectors that are gaining or losing, depending on the day's kind of mood, if you will. Kriti, come on in on this. You're watching a lot of those cross-asset platform. What's one trade that our audience needs to know about today?
Well, right now it's all about the FX markets. You really want to keep an eye on the dollar here. We actually just saw a big drop to the downside. The big headline today being that the Fed actually came out and said they're establishing swap lines using Treasury as collateral so they can address some of those dollar shortages that we saw in the markets. Really important here for emerging markets in particular.
And so, Dave, as we continue through this day, we mentioned last trading day of the quarter. How important is it that it's the last day of the quarter, or is that just a date on the calendar here?
No, it's all about rebalancing, Dave, isn't it not? Come on, Jason.
Well, arguably, that's been going on for days, depending on who you pay attention to. The whole idea that, investors, given that many of them have sort of set percentages of stocks and bonds that they want to maintain, and share prices have fallen so much this quarter that to some extent, they have to go in and sort of tweak the numbers. So that means buying shares. At the same time, though, the fact that it's the end of the quarter, you get month-end trading as a rule. Yeah. You can go back to the end of February, and you saw the busiest day of trading since October 2008. But there are a couple things that suggest you're not going to get a repeat this month. One is that the February end of month was a Friday. So, you get end of week too. So you got a lot of things coming together.
Right.
And of course, it's a Tuesday, so you don't have that this time. And the other thing is you had a heck of a weekly decline that week that preceded the burst of trading. Yeah. And things have kind of settled out here the last couple of days. So we're not kind of set up, perhaps, for the same sort of pickup in volume at the close that you saw a month ago.
Yeah, I have to say, it is a little bit nice to, especially as we're dealing with all the headlines everywhere, to, sort of deal with a situation, Carol, where, stocks trading within some measure of a range and not, these wild swings, which really, I do think spook investors in a lot of ways, especially retail investors. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dave. And I do wonder, about it being somewhat of an orderly trade. And I do wonder, what is the most important thing for investors right now? Is it the bailout packages that are coming, the stimulus packages that are coming from D.C. to kind of shore up our economy and shore up businesses? Is it about getting the virus under control? They're all kind of connected at this point, but I am curious what you're hearing.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, really kind of surveying the damage to some extent that's happening to companies as a result of this. An example from earlier today that popped up, Domino's Pizza. You think this is a stock that's actually up this year, which makes it unique among restaurant owners in S&P's indexes, the S&P 500 and whatnot. So they come out and say, we are going to, take off our full year forecast, they're out the window. We're withdrawing them. And they're drawing down money that they need to be able to stay in business. So it's like, this is dominoes. Everything's going their way. It's all takeout and delivery, and that's all you can do in a whole lot of places now. So, you see those shares taking a hit in today's trading. They're still up for the quarter, just not up as much as they were before. That's for sure.
Well, there's some interesting things today, too, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but even like Carnival tapping in to the bond market, right? This is
$3 billion worth, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is
that's just part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, they also are selling convertible securities and shares. Put it all together, you're talking $6 billion.
Good Lord.
And initially, Carnival fell in response to that. Then it bounced back. So, it just goes to show you that companies can deal with these sort of financing issues. Carnival up about 3.8% as we speak.
They've got about $11.5 billion on their worth of debt, I should say, on their balance sheet already. A company that's got about $21 billion in revenues when the year is going as you expect. But it does show us, Dave, right, that there are several avenues for companies, especially publicly held companies, to access credit and get some assist here. And I do wonder about the pressure that's being put on banks and, other financial institutions to kind of help out the publicly held companies at this point to keep everything going.
Right. And that may well explain some of the weakness that we're seeing in the bank stocks at this point. Now, you can argue they're in a better position, the companies are, than they were, say, back in 2008, where things were unraveling. But, you look across the group. I mean, I'm just looking at the KBW Bank Index, 24 stocks at the moment down 2.7%. You're seeing really in the regional banks, the likes of PNC, Fifth Third, Regions Financial, Key Corp. I mean, they're taking the biggest hits. And those are the kinds of banks that, they really do kind of focus on helping business. So, that's coming at a time when interest rates are down and bond yields aren't going their way. I mean, there are a lot of things that are kind of up in the air at this point.
All right, Dave Wilson, thank you so much for your time. We'll talk to you next hour with your chart of the day, and then right after the close for your stock of the day. That's Dave Wilson, stocks editor at Bloomberg. Let's do the Bloomberg Business Week bite of the day. It's one number that tells us a lot. Today's number, Carol, 100%. I like this one.
Nice and round, Jason. Sales of MGA Entertainment's Little Tikes brand of toys were up 100% in March. Does Alice play with these toys?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Up 100% in March compared to last year, with the tots stuck at home and play dates. Parks largely off limits, parents have been buying toys in bulk in hopes of keeping little ones occupied and away from the TV while they work. Sales tracker NPD Group, they back up the trend with a recent report showing that toy sales were up 26% for the week ending March 21st. The toy categories with the biggest spikes were games and puzzles up 228%. We've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
Building sets up 76%, arts and crafts up 70%, and outdoor toys up 20%, according to NPD, which is a reminder in any crisis, there are definitely winners and losers in all of this, right? As we kind of adapt to the situation.
And man, I mean, this is really a thing. And when you put this together with increased, I dare say, and I think the data back this up too, increased screen time and, parents in many cases without childcare just looking for ways to keep those little tykes entertained. I, among many, feel that pain for sure. All right, let's get to Bob Moon now. He's got world and national headlines. Hey, Bob.
Jason, President Trump called on Congress to provide $2 trillion for U.S. infrastructure seizing on the coronavirus outbreak to try once again to advance one of his longest-standing priorities. Bloomberg's Martin DeCaro reports.
President Trump has never settled on how to finance an infrastructure plan, and there's little consensus in Congress. coronavirus. Rob Puentes at the Washington-based Eno Center for Transportation says that may matter less now.
As we're throwing really infinite money through Washington, one possible way to address the infrastructure crisis would be to add this to that ever-growing pile of debt.
But there are other questions.
Where would the money go? How would it be spent? I mean, these capital projects are generally slow moving.
It's unclear whether Congress would have time to sort it all out in the context of another emergency relief bill designed to provide Americans with immediate help. In Washington, Martin DeCaro, Bloomberg Radio.
Like New York City, Chicago is converting a massive convention center into a temporary hospital. Reporter Omar Jimenez says the first phase will provide room for 500 patients by the end of the week.
By the time this is over, there will be 3 different sections of the convention center that can house patients, and numbers-wise, their goal is to house at least 3,000 patients in the midst of this pandemic.
In the meantime, the U.S. death toll from the coronavirus climbed past 3,500 today, eclipsing China's official count. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bob Moon. Carol, Jason, back to you.
All right, Bob, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Carol Masser, and we are awaiting some comments from New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. He is, we are told, out at a place familiar to us, Carol, Arthur Ashe Tennis Center, the Billie Jean King Tennis Center, home to Arthur Ashe Stadium, I should say. That is being converted into a medical facility, and let's remember, it was not too long ago that we were there on the grounds for the U.S. Open. That's how much the world has changed. Just one of a million reminders.
Right. Think about the Javits Center, and I've seen pictures of Central Park where they're setting up makeshift hospital beds, basically for patients, and so on and so forth. So we're seeing this certainly in the hardest hit areas around the country, and certainly in here in New York and some of these major cities. In the meantime, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, looking ahead, I was listening to David Weston on Bloomberg Radio earlier. I mean, it's easy to forget that we're in an election year at this point. So Speaker Nancy Pelosi is saying that the nation must move to a vote-by-mail system because of the ongoing coronavirus. She's going to advocate for funding for that in the next stimulus measure because we just don't know what the outcome is and when this ultimately will end. And so she's planning ahead, which is something we all need to start thinking about.
Absolutely, yeah. And we expect we'll hear something from the president as the day goes on, maybe over the course of the afternoon, maybe at that coronavirus daily briefing that comes usually in the 5 o'clock hour. Infrastructure, that may be the stimulus that we go to next. And meanwhile, you have a lot of people who are just trying to contend with the day-to-day issues around this. Walmart, one that in the face of, continuing to be a go-to destination for folks for supplies, all the major supplies that you can think of, masks, gloves, one-way aisles, those are ways that they are dealing with keeping their workers safe, which ultimately is incredibly important if they want to stay open and operating.
Yeah, exactly. And I think all of the supermarkets and places that have stayed open, they need to think about this because their workers, who would have thought? It's interesting. You have doctors, and then you've got folks at supermarkets and Walmarts who are on the front line of this, right? Trying to stay open to make sure that people who are stuck at home and need, whether it's food or home supplies, that they're able to access them. So, as you said, Walmart's providing masks, gloves for its workers. They're taking their temperature before shifts, and this is what they're doing to make sure that their workers stay safe. And we're seeing certainly employees of such institutions putting more pressure on their employers to do just that.
Well, and think about, we talk about the size and scope of Walmart all the time, but Dan Bartlett, who runs all their public affairs there, said the retailer might need as many as 7 million masks per week eventually. So you think about what that means, and we talk about again the power of Walmart and how big it is, but also the number of people that it serves and serving a critical function right now. Let's get over to Charlie Pellet, if we may, for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. As we await Mayor de Blasio and his latest update, you guys talking about Walmart shares lower today by just about 0.2%. We've got the Dow, the S&P and NASDAQ all declining. Stocks are falling. Final trading day of the quarter. The U.S. stock market, though, the S&P has risen 17% over the past 7 days as it careens toward its worst quarter since the financial crisis. How bad? Down 19.57% right now in the quarterly column, which is also the year-to-date column. The Dow lower by 211 points, down 1% right now. S&P down 27, a drop there of 1%. NASDAQ down 33, a decline of 0.4%. We've got the 10-year up 17.30 seconds. The yield 0.67%. Gold down 2% now at $15.89 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude rallying now by 3.3%, up 66 cents a barrel at $20.76. So again, recapping, equities lower, S&P down 28, down by 1.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser here with you. A busy afternoon ahead. They all are busy in many ways, Carol, because we are continually hearing from city and state leaders. It was interesting looking at the rundown of those press conferences earlier today shared by one of our producers. I shouldn't say all the states, but, a huge number of states, like more than half a dozen now, holding daily briefings in many cases to update their citizens.
Right, and you can hear the stress in those governors' voices in particular. Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. now have issued stay-at-home orders. Virginia's stretching to June 10th, and the San Francisco Bay Area is going to extend its mandate to May. So this is just a reminder that when we hear these deadlines or these hopes to kind of reopen our world, they're movable dates, and we constantly see that. It's based on the numbers, and you continue to see the governors, even though maybe some of the new cases numbers are going down a little bit, they're still putting pressure on individuals to stay at home and keep that social distancing. So we do want to talk a little bit about what we're hearing on the medical side of this story. Andy Prakash is professor of molecular microbiology and immunology at Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. Supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Andy joining us, of course, on the phone from Baltimore. Dr. Prakash, so nice to have you with us. We were saying that you can feel that the world is working very, very hard to figure out a medical solution to this. Also, at the same time, we're seeing the medical community feeling stressed in terms of caring for those existing cases. Let's talk about that first, because we have a story on the Bloomberg that talks about doctors being threatened not to talk to the press about the situation. We hear stories about doctors having to make choices about who gets necessary medical equipment. What are you hearing on that front?
Well, I think there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of anxiety, I think. When you're particularly in cities where you're just at the beginning of the case curve, it's the unknown of how many cases are going to come in. Are the public health interventions going to work? What's the timing of the interventions that are going to work? And that affects planning, because you really don't have firm numbers to plan for, so you try to plan for the worst case scenario, hope for the best case scenario, and all of those things are just incredibly stressful on a population of people who are, let's be honest, right? These are the people that are actually going and facing these dealing with infected individuals and putting their lives on the line every day.
And so, Dr. Prakash, one other thing, or another thing, there are so many things we want to talk to you about, but, one of the other things is this notion of, how this is playing out across the nation, because that speaks to the doctors, it speaks to the stress that they're feeling, but also the way individual governments are dealing with it. Help us understand kind of this variable reaction that we're seeing and maybe some of the implications of that.
Well, the number of cases that are occurring can really vary based on which part of the country that you're in. And so different hospital networks are at different levels of preparation. And different hospital networks are gearing up for a surge at different times. And so what you're seeing is that there's a very sort of, I'll use the term heterogeneous response across the nation, because it's all dictated by your local situation. For example, if you don't have a lot of cases, you probably don't want to start hoarding up too many respirators and those kind of things, because obviously there are needs in other parts of the country. Yet you have to balance that with the idea that eventually you will have a surge of cases, and you want to be prepared for that.
So who ultimately should be making those decisions? Because, I mean, embedded in everything you just said, there's a lot of potential conflicts there and a lot of wrong decisions that could be made.
Yeah, so, centralized decision-making is probably the best course of action. Making sure that supply line chains are there and that the movement of supplies can be done very, very quickly is a second sort of logistical thing that needs to be put in place.
What do you think at this point is the most important treatment development that folks are chasing really around the world? We're seeing a lot of coordination, certainly between the healthcare community, drug makers, and so on, researchers. But what do you think is the most important thing that is happening right now that can really help us get control of this?
Well, right now the important thing is that multiple institutions are trying to set up controlled trials to actually firmly decide whether or not a treatment will or will not be beneficial. So I know here at Johns Hopkins we have a number of them going. This early stage of the surge in cases is the time when we can generate some data about what is the most effective treatment and then apply that to cases that are coming down later down the pipeline. So a number of drugs are in place. We here at Johns Hopkins have been invested in using serum from individuals who've recovered as a potential treatment for new cases. A lot of these things are now being tested, and the trials to show their efficacy are being put online, and we hope in the next couple of weeks to start seeing the results of those trials.
Dr. Prakash, we were talking yesterday with one of the team up at Columbia that's working with David Ho, and you know him better than we do in terms of his work on AIDS research and other things. And he was talking, this doctor was talking about sort of the collaboration that is happening. Would you echo him that we're seeing a level of collaboration and maybe that's driven by a sense of urgency here? And what does that look like on the front lines where you are?
I think that is one of the most amazing things that I've been experiencing over the past few weeks. People reaching out across disciplines, reaching from the clinical into the basic science, from the basic science into the clinical, trying to find ways that each of us can contribute to this overall goal of helping to deal with infected patients coming through. My laboratory has set up a whole new wing that's devoted strictly to helping the clinical groups here in terms of assays that we can do to support them. And that's happened in the past 4 weeks. And so there's been an amazing number of discussions and conversations really with this idea that what can we do to help our patients as soon as possible. And it's been fantastically inspiring.
Well, let me follow up with you on that, because it's interesting. As you were saying that, I thought about a question that we've been asking, all the big important people that we talk to on this program and beyond, which is, what do you think will change on the other side of this in terms of the way you operate as a researcher, as a physician, as a member of not just a team at Johns Hopkins, but in the broader medical community? Is this the sort of thing that could change the way you do business and do your work going forward?
It's been hard to find time to think about that, given everything else. But honestly, I really do hope that is the case, because the conversations that we've had and the appreciation of how different people coming to the table can really contribute to overall patient management in this case has been eye-opening, I think, on both sides, both in the hospital as well as here in the research laboratories. So I really would think that this is an example of some place where all the best parts of the medical complex are being shown and can show that they're working together.
When you look around the globe, dealing with some level of crisis because of the virus, and secondly, when you look around the globe, are there parts of the world, whether it's some of the emerging markets, we've talked about India and Africa, certainly on our broadcast, that make you a little bit nervous and the impact that the virus could have on them?
Yeah, so I think the U.S. is really going to see, again, I'll use the term heterogeneous because I think that's the best one, even though it may be a little technical. You're going to see very different epidemics in different parts of the country, really based on how many times the virus has sort of moved into that area and how the public health measures, how effective they are and when they were implemented. So you're going to see different reports from different parts of the country. That's not in any way meant to minimize the outbreak or say that anybody's doing a better job than the other, but you're going to see different reports coming from different places about this. And absolutely, I think, we have collaborators in various parts of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and I think that's a place where we're very concerned about whether there's how large numbers of cases can be dealt with by the infrastructures already. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, they just controlled an epidemic of Ebola virus that's been going on for nearly 2 years. An outstanding public health effort. My guess is they're not going to have to gear up to deal with yet another viral disease, COVID-19.
Well, and Dr. Prakash, when you mention that, it brings me to another point, which is this idea that this is, while there's a short-term element to this in a sense of urgency, this is also a long game in many ways, and you understand that far better than we do, given the research that you have done and given the different diseases that you have tracked. What sort of timelines do you think about in terms of, obviously there is a health crisis, an immediate health crisis that we have to deal with, but in terms of really getting our arms around this particular disease and coping with it for a serious amount of time going forward, how should we think about that in the longer term?
Well, look to the positive examples, and there are countries there like Singapore, Hong Kong, even to some extent Korea, that suffered a really large number of cases, but that have gotten those cases under control and are starting to really get far ahead of the virus. So those examples tell us that the virus can be controlled with good public health measures. And that's the most important thing. So I think getting this under control with the public health interventions is going to be the critical thing. Trying to send the message to individuals about changing their behaviors, even though after a few weeks it's going to be very, very difficult to keep some of these things in place. We can get ahead of this, and there are examples out there of countries that have been able to control this and then restore some semblance of social order afterwards, or social opening up afterwards.
All right. Well,
go ahead.
We're going to leave it on that note. Andy, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Dr. Andy Prakash at Johns Hopkins University, Bloomberg School of Public Health. All right, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is giving an update in just a moment, and we will take you there to get the latest from him. But I do think it's interesting, Jason, to hear what he has to say. Actually, Mayor de Blasio is speaking. Let's listen in.
Preparing every day for what lies ahead. Getting ready the hospital facilities we need to protect lives of New Yorkers. Yesterday, it was the comfort every single day. And so many good people are helping us. Preparing every day for what lies ahead. Getting ready the hospital facilities we need to protect lives of New Yorkers. Yesterday, it was the comfort, basically floating right up to New York City with another full hospital, an amazing feat. Today, it is this facility here in Queens that right now looks like a bunch of tennis courts. Very soon, this is going to be 350 hospital beds to protect the lives of New Yorkers. And there are two ways of looking at this. If you want to say the glass is half empty, you would say these tennis courts symbolize what we're all going through right now. We'd all like to go back to the times when things are normal and people are out here playing tennis. We all feel that. I feel that. And we miss it, and it's sad. But we also know that this crisis will not go on forever. It will be very intense, but thank God it will be brief. When I look out here, I see the glass is half full, which is the fact that everyone is rising to the challenge. Everyone is contributing, each in their own way. We have People from organizations all over this city, all over the world, calling literally every single hour, offering help. And when the folks here at the tennis center heard there was a need, they said yes immediately. And all the people we reached out to create this hospital said the same thing. So I'm looking forward to the day when this is going to be a place for tennis again. But in the meantime, I'm inspired by the fact that people are stepping up. And we have set a very, very high bar of what we need to create in the next few weeks in terms of hospital beds in this city. And every time I turn around, I see another person, another organization stepping up to make it happen. And that, to me, is inspiring. And that speaks to what New Yorkers do all the time, the attitude we have that we will overcome anything and everything. That is on display right here at this tennis center. We have to, as New Yorkers, deal honestly with the pain we're experiencing, the grief we're experiencing, and at the same time keep moving forward. I've unfortunately had to liken this to a war. That's what soldiers have to do in a war. We have to find a way to mourn, but never be paralyzed, because people's lives are at stake, and we have to be there always for those we can save, those we can comfort, those we can help. But we are definitely feeling the pain of those we have lost from our own community here in public service. And I want to particularly focus on a Department of Correction that's doing such difficult work right now, handling a crisis that's never been seen before by any of us, obviously, but with the particular conditions that exist in our correction system. I told you back on Friday that we lost an investigator, David Perez. We've now lost a young IT worker, Hunter O'Kelly Rodriguez, and a beloved longtime officer of 20 years as a member of our correction team, and we're withholding the name at the request of the family. But I know all the correctional officers, the staff, everyone at Correctional Health Services, everyone's feeling these losses right now, and they're resolute that we have to keep fighting to protect everyone, the folks who work in our correction system and all those who are incarcerated as well. Now, we all know that we are racing against time right now. And I felt it is my job to really let people know how intense this battle will be. The fact is coming on fast, and it will not be over in an instant. There will be weeks where we are going to have to keep fighting. And every time I've heard any projection, oh, it's going to be over soon, don't worry about it, I always say, no, that's not the truth. And it's a danger to tell people something's going to be easier than it really will be. So I'm telling you all, it will be tough, but it will be something that we will fight through and we will survive. But it begins with a recognition of just how much we're going to need. So again, before all this started, before the coronavirus in this city, we had about 20,000 working hospital beds in our major hospitals, public, private, voluntary, independent, whatever phrases you want to use. All the hospitals combined had about 20,000 staffed hospital beds. We now need to, in just the next week, triple that number, produce 3 times that number. And you might say to yourself, how on earth is that possible? And when I first heard the projections, I questioned it myself. But then look at the facts. Look at how quickly a hospital can be created. Whether it is in a place like the Javits Center, or a place like this tennis center, or a hotel, we know how to make any number of buildings into a hospital in a matter of days. So then you'd say, well, how does that add up? Look, the Javits Center alone, thousands of beds will be built out there. The Comfort starts with 750, can go up to 1,000 beds. Here's 350 beds here. A lot of hotels, hundreds of beds each. We're just going to keep going every single day, adding and adding and adding. to get to the point where we have what we need. This facility will be crucial. The Brooklyn Cruise Terminal is going to be handled by the same company. They're going to set it up rapidly, and we're then going to go to the next site, the next site, the next site to meet our goal. We're working with the federal government, with FEMA, with the state. We're working with the hotel industry. We're working with folks who own major facilities. Everyone is working in common cause. I have not heard someone say no yet. And that's something New Yorkers should know about and be proud of. No one, I literally have not heard anyone, we say we need your building, I've not heard anyone say no. Everyone understands what time it is. So right here at the Billie Jean King Center, named after someone who's such a hero to so many of us. Well, I think it's very fitting, and I think Billie Jean would agree, that this place will be a life-saving place. This place will not only help folks afflicted by coronavirus, help them to survive and recover and go home. It is specifically going to help patients who come through Elmhurst Hospital and can receive care here. It's going to help take the pressure off of Elmhurst. We all know that for a variety of reasons, Elmhurst has been the place that has borne the brunt. And the staff at Elmhurst, the doctors and nurses, everyone who works at Elmhurst, they've done an amazing job. But we want to give them as much relief as possible. Starting next week, this facility will be able to take people from Elmhurst, not folks who need ICU care, but other coronavirus patients. Bring them over here, relieve some of that pressure immediately. 350 beds will be here with all the staffing, the doctors and nurses, all the staffing needed. That's what the company does. It brings all this in, brings in the equipment, brings in the beds. It'll take 3 weeks to build out, but as I said, starting next week, patients will start arriving. And I want to thank the folks who made this possible. Right here, in terms of this amazing facility, and I want to thank him. He's with us, the Chief Operating Officer of the U.S. Tennis Association, Daniel Zausner. Thank you, Daniel, for partnering with the city and all of us to make this happen. Thank you, and all your colleagues, and you said yes, and I thank you for that. Billy Sullivan, CEO of Celesco, the contractor that does this work. Billy's over there, sorry, because of distancing, it's hard to see people sometimes. And they'll be working with us at the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal as well. And of course, our partners all the time, the Army Corps of Engineers, New York State, and our own Office of Emergency Management. Thank you, Deanne, to you and your team. And a special thanks to our colleagues at Department of Design and Construction of the city who do amazing work, and they can do it very quick. So thank you to Jamie Torres Springer, the first Deputy Commissioner, who is definitely, Jamie, no one's going to miss you wherever you walk in that jacket. I want to thank you. You're very visible right now. Very visible. And we're going to be joined in a moment from Health and Hospitals, obviously the collaboration with Elmhurst Hospital. Dr. Eric Way, the Vice President and Chief Quality Control Officer for Health and Hospitals, will be joining us, and we thank them. I want to give you some other updates real quick, and then we'll turn to questions from our colleagues in the media. So, a few days ago, we all heard the very tough news about the record number of calls to 911, and the real challenges that our first responders were facing, our paramedics and our EMTs through EMS. And we said we're going to have to make a lot of adjustments, a lot of changes to address the demand, but we would do it. Well, at that point, we were hoping the cavalry was coming. But I have to say, I am so moved and so appreciative to the federal government with how they moved so quickly here and in great number. And I give all the credit in the world to FEMA and Regional Administrator Tom Von Essen, who everyone knows was our fire commissioner. I think it's no accident that Tom is really looking out for us, and he certainly understands how important EMS is to the city. So I want to tell you that we announced This morning, formally, that 250 more ambulances are coming right away to New York City from FEMA, from all over the country, to help us address our 911 calls. 135 of those ambulances are here already. And I want you to understand how unusual it is to hear something's coming and then it's here immediately. This is really powerful, and it shows how much the federal government is getting into gear now, full gear, to help us. We're going to have approximately 500 more EMTs and paramedics coming in from all over the country. 270 are here right now, and they're going immediately into action to help our extraordinary colleagues at the fire department and EMS to do the work that they do. I mentioned yesterday that nurses, more and more nurses are coming in. 500 on Friday had already gotten to our hospitals. I said we were going to add another 500 this week. I'm now announcing an additional 1,000 nurses that Health and Hospitals has coming very soon through contracting they've done. So we are sounding the alarm in many places and reaching out to many friends and many colleagues to get help. But these numbers now are going to make a huge difference. Imagine just in the last few days adding a grand total of 2,000 nurses to help protect New Yorkers. That's just in the last few days, more coming, and that's going to mean lives will be saved. Now, I'll always tell you good news, but that does not mean that the battle's over, and it doesn't mean we're not going to need a lot more help. Remember, as we speak now, we have a quarter of all the coronavirus cases in the United States of America. And I have spoken several times to the president in recent days, to the defense secretary, to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and numerous federal officials. I've said the same thing to all of them. This coming Sunday, April 5th, is a demarcation line. This is the point at which we must be prepared for next week, when we expect a huge increase in the number of cases. What I asked very clearly last week was for military medical personnel to be deployed here from the permanent military and from the reserves. I had this conversation with all of them. I said specifically 1,000 nurses, 300 respiratory therapists, 150 doctors. And I said we need as many as possible by Sunday, April 5th, and we need to know that any others are going to come shortly thereafter. I have reiterated that need and that request, and I have to say in many ways it's a demand, because this is about saving lives in time. And I'm waiting for an answer from the White House, and I will always give credit where credit is due. The federal government in the last couple of weeks has shown us a much more vigorous approach, and it's helping us, and we are very appreciative. I thank the president. I thank all the cabinet officers who have been a part of this effort, especially thank FEMA. But we must have that additional personnel to be able to get through next week and the weeks right after that. So I'm going to keep reiterating this specific request, and I'm waiting for an answer from the White House. It is a reasonable request, given that we are the nation's largest city and we are the epicenter of this crisis. Now, ventilators, which I'm going to talk about constantly, we are grateful. Again, in the last week or so, the federal government really stepped it up. 2,500 ventilators came into New York City. That is amazing, but we're going to need a lot more, and we're going to need them soon. We're hearing that more help may be on the way shortly from the federal government. We're waiting for that to be confirmed. We need it. That number we put forward, 15,000 as the total need, remains the total need, and it is a very tight time frame, because none of us knows for sure. Is the worst week going to be in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks? We don't know when exactly it peaks.